Holy shit, did Naruto just bitch slap Orochimaru's torso clean off and laugh about it? This ain't your cute fox boy anymore. This is Shao Kahn wearing a genin jacket like it's a fucking costume. He conquered villages, ate souls, and made the 5 Kage bow like broke bitches. The Leaf Village? Try the new Outworld. Peak you suck energy.
There is a legend buried beneath the Leaf Village that has nothing to do with foxes, nothing to do with demons sealed in infant bellies, and everything to do with a soul so old and so violent that the universe itself tried to hide it inside a child's body and pray. The universe lost that bet. Naruto Uzumaki was 8 years old the night the soul of Shao Kahn broke through. He was 8 years old, and he was on his knees in a blind alleyway behind the market district, blood running from his lower lip where somebody's boot had connected 3 seconds earlier. And the weight of every year the hidden Leaf Village had spent treating him like a disease was pressing down on his ribs so hard he could barely pull air. The alley smelled like rainwater and old trash. The stones under his knees were cold. Above him, silhouetted against the single lamplight bleeding in from the street, stood 9 men, 4 off-duty chunin still wearing their flak jackets, 5 civilians carrying knives and broken bottles, all of them carrying the kind of courage that only arrives at the bottom of a sake bottle. They had followed him for 6 blocks. They had cornered him the way a pack corners something small. One of them was saying something about the demon, about October, about what he deserved. Naruto heard none of it. He was staring at the ground, and the ground was staring back, and somewhere behind his eyes something enormous was waking up. The green light started in his fingertips. It pulsed outward from underneath his skin. Emerald, electric, cracking through his veins the way lightning cracks through water. The men stopped talking. One of them took a step backward. The air in the alleyway changed temperature in both directions simultaneously, the walls sweating with sudden humidity, while the breath leaving every mouth turned to frost. Naruto's hands hit the stones flat, and the stones cracked under his palms, and the memories of Shao Kahn hit him like 10,000 years of war compressed into a single heartbeat. He saw everything. 10,000 conquered realms. Edenia in flames, the beautiful kingdom burning while its queen screamed from the steps of a palace that would never stand again. Kitana kneeling, her bladed fans crossed on the ground before her, tears running down a face that could launch entire religions into holy war. Armies, endless armies, crumbling like sandcastles under an iron boot the size of a continent. Tournaments where warriors thought they had a chance and learned otherwise in the space between one heartbeat and the absence of the next. A throne built from the skulls of kings. A hammer that had ended civilizations. A voice that had announced the death of worlds with the same casual weight that a farmer announces rain. All of it. Every conquest, every execution, every moment of absolute dominion, flooding through the neural pathways of an 8-year-old orphan who had never owned anything in his life except the hatred of strangers. And the consciousness behind those memories, ancient, imperial, iron-willed, and merciless, tore through 8 years of childhood like a fist through wet paper and seized the body it had always been destined to inhabit. Naruto Uzumaki stood up. His frame expanded as he rose. Muscle layered over muscle in real time, his shoulders broadening, his arms thickening, his shirt tearing at the seams and falling away in strips of orange fabric that hit the alley floor like shed skin. His spine straightened from the hunch of a beaten child into the posture of a man who had stood at the apex of existence and found it insufficient. His jaw set. His eyes, blue a moment ago, the blue of a boy who still believed someone might love him, ignited from the inside. The irises went emerald. The pupils vanished into fields of burning green light. The sclera followed. His entire gaze became a solid wall of radioactive green, and the shadows in the alleyway fled from it the way shadows flee from a bonfire. His voice dropped an octave and doubled itself. The second layer a low resonant boom that made the alley walls vibrate and sent chips of stone falling from the brickwork above. "You dare strike me?" The wrath hammer materialized in his right hand. It came together from green light. Particles of soul energy spiraling inward, compressing, solidifying into a weapon that weighed more than anything in the alley had a right to support. Colossal. The head of it wider than his torso, the surface crawling with emerald lightning. The hum of it filled the entire alleyway with a frequency that made teeth ache and vision blur. And when the full weight of it settled into existence, the cobblestones under Naruto's feet cracked in a perfect circle and sank 2 inches into the earth. The Chunin at the front of the mob, a man named Takeshi, who had survived 2 border wars and considered himself hard, opened his mouth to say something. The word never formed. Naruto swung the wrath hammer in a horizontal arc at waist height, and Takeshi and the 2 men flanking him ceased to be a category of thing that exists. The impact sound was beyond thunder. It was the sound of physics being told to sit down. The wall behind where they had been standing cratered inward 3 feet, brick dust exploding outward in a cloud that smelled like iron and ozone. 3 glowing green skulls rose from the impact zone, hovering, luminescent, trailing wisps of emerald light. The souls of 3 dead men pulled free from bodies that had failed to contain them. Naruto opened his mouth, and the soul consumption activated. The skulls streamed toward him like water toward a drain, pouring into his chest in ribbons of green fire. The cut on his lip sealed shut. The bruise on his cheekbone vanished. The ache in his ribs evaporated. His power climbed, visibly climbed, the glow around his body intensifying, the hum of the wrath hammer growing louder. The remaining men in the alleyway did what any living creature does when confronted with a predator beyond its comprehension. They broke. One of them screamed. 2 of them tried to run and collided with each other in the narrow space. A Chunin, flak jacket, kunai already drawn, hands shaking so violently the blade caught lamplight in stuttering flashes, threw the kunai at Naruto's face in a reflex born of pure terror. Naruto caught the kunai between 2 fingers without looking at it. He snapped it in half with a flex. The metal screamed as it broke. He walked out of the alleyway. Behind him, what remained was less a crime scene and more a geological event. The cobblestones were fractured in radiating patterns. One wall had a 3-foot concavity punched into it. The survivors, the ones who still had the motor function to drag themselves, crawled toward the street in the opposite direction, leaving blood trails and whimpering sounds that would haunt the neighbors for weeks. Hiruzen Sarutobi arrived 11 minutes later. The 3rd Hokage of the Hidden Leaf, the god of shinobi, the professor, the man who had seen both great wars and fought in them and won, dropped from a rooftop with 2 Anbu flanking him and landed at the mouth of the alleyway. He had been pulled from his office by screaming. Multiple screams from multiple directions, all originating from the same 2-block radius. He expected the fox. He expected red chakra and the stench of demonic energy and the nightmare scenario that every seal master in the village had warned him about for 8 years. What he found was worse. Naruto stood in the middle of the street with the wrath hammer resting on his shoulder. His body was wrong, too large for an 8-year-old, too muscular, too still. His posture carried the weight of absolute authority. His eyes burned green through the night air, casting twin beams of emerald light across the wet cobblestones. The remnants of his orange jacket lay in strips on the ground behind him. He wore the remains of his pants and nothing else, and every inch of visible skin radiated a faint green luminescence that made him look like something carved from a radioactive star. Hiruzen stopped walking. He had faced the 9-tailed fox. He had stood in front of that beast, 100 feet tall, tails whipping, the air itself burning with its hatred, and he had given orders. He had fought Orochimaru, his own student-turned-monster, and he had survived. He had seen jutsu that rewrote geography, and he had classified them and moved on with his evening. He reached for zero jutsu now. He gave 0 orders. His hands hung at his sides, and his pipe fell from his mouth and clattered on the stone, and the old man went white. The color drained from his face, starting at his hairline and running down like water. And his eyes that had seen everything the shinobi world had to offer, went wide enough to show the whites all the way around. Because what he was reading from the boy's chakra signature was beyond the category of Jinchuriki, beyond the category of shinobi, beyond anything the elemental nations had a name for or a response to. The pressure coming off Naruto's body was dense enough to make the Anbu behind Hiruzen take involuntary steps backward. One of them, Dog Mask, 15 years of service, dropped to one knee. The other gripped the wall beside him and held on. Naruto raised the Wrath Hammer and leveled it at the old man's face. The head of the weapon hung in the air 6 feet from Hiruzen's nose, crackling with soul energy, humming with a frequency that made the Hokage's teeth vibrate in his jaw. "I am Shao Kahn. Bow to me!" The voice hit Hiruzen's chest like a physical force. The dual layers of it, the boy's tone, buried somewhere underneath the Emperor's resonance, rolled through the street and rattled windows in buildings 2 blocks away. A cat bolted from a rooftop. Somewhere in the distance, a dog began to howl. Hiruzen Sarutobi did something he had never done in 68 years of life. He took a step backward. His heel caught the cobblestone behind him, and he stumbled. The god of shinobi stumbled, and caught himself on a wall with one hand. His breath came in short pulls. His mind, trained over decades to assess and adapt and overcome, was running into the same wall over and over. This is beyond me. This is beyond me. This is beyond what I was built to handle. The fox had always been the threat they feared. The demon sealed inside the boy. That was the disaster scenario, the contingency plan, the thing that kept Anbu stationed on rooftops within line of sight of the Uzumaki apartment every hour of every day. They had planned for the fox. They had planned for nothing like this. The soul inside the vessel was something else entirely, something older, something from outside the vocabulary of chakra and biju and shinobi warfare. Hiruzen looked into those burning green eyes and saw, with a clarity that made his stomach drop into his boots, the gaze of something that had conquered worlds, plural, worlds, and found every single one of them wanting. That night, Hiruzen returned to his office and sat behind his desk without lighting his pipe. He stayed there until morning. He wrote nothing. He summoned nobody. He stared at the wall and tried to imagine a scenario in which the Hidden Leaf Village survived whatever Naruto Uzumaki had become, and every scenario he constructed collapsed under its own weight before it reached a conclusion. 4 years passed. Naruto moved through the academy the way a king moves through a peasant market, present out of curiosity, never out of necessity. He sat in the back row. He spoke to nobody unless they approached him first, and the ones who approached him first never approached him a second time. His body continued to grow beyond what any child's frame should accommodate. By 12, he stood taller than most of the instructors, his shoulders filling door frames, his presence filling rooms. Iruka Umino taught his classes and avoided eye contact with the boy in the back row, and went home every evening with a headache that started behind his left eye and spread. The other students gave Naruto a radius of empty seats that expanded every semester like the blast zone of an ongoing detonation. He graduated because graduation was the mechanism by which the village assigned him a team, and a team was the mechanism by which missions would arrive, and missions were the mechanism by which territory would become accessible. Everything was a tool. Everything served the expansion. Team assignments placed him with Kakashi Hatake, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno. The Hokage made this decision the way a man makes the decision to strap a warhead to a delivery vehicle and pray the guidance system holds, with full knowledge that the prayer was the weakest link in the chain. The bell test happened on a Tuesday morning under a sky so blue it looked painted. Training ground 3, 3 posts, 2 bells, 1 jonin who showed up 2 hours late with an orange book in his hand and a posture so relaxed it bordered on performance art. Naruto sat on the center log with his arms crossed and his eyes closed. He had been waiting since dawn, and the contempt radiating from his stillness was thick enough to taste. His frame dwarfed the log. His shoulders, armored now in spiked pads that had materialized from soul energy the way all his equipment materialized, forged from nothing, permanent as iron, cast shadows across the grass. He wore black. He wore green-trimmed plates of armor across his chest and forearms. He wore zero orange, zero evidence that a prankster had ever lived inside this body. Sasuke stood 15 feet away, projecting confidence the way a candle projects light in a thunderstorm. His hands were in his pockets. His chin was up. His Sharingan had yet to awaken, But the posture said he believed in himself, and the slight tension in his jaw said he believed in himself the way you believe in an umbrella during a hurricane. Technically, but without commitment. He had seen Naruto break a training dummy in half during a taijutsu exercise 6 months ago. The dummy had been reinforced steel. It had sounded like a car accident. Sakura stood near Sasuke because Sasuke was the thing she oriented toward, but her body language told a different story from her intentions. She was angled away from Naruto. Her weight was on her back foot. Her hands gripped her own elbows. Every survival instinct she possessed, instincts she had never needed before, instincts that predated language and logic, was screaming at her that the space near Naruto was a wrong place to stand. She could feel the air pressure change when he breathed. Kakashi appeared in a swirl of leaves. One lazy eye. Silver hair. The little orange book tucked into his hip pouch. He raised one hand in greeting and opened his mouth to deliver the excuse he had been workshopping for the last 90 minutes. Naruto opened his eyes. The green glow hit Kakashi's exposed eye like a searchlight, and the copy ninja's greeting died in his throat. He had read the file. He had spoken to the Hokage. He had been briefed, and yet standing in the actual presence of whatever Naruto Uzumaki had become was a different experience entirely from reading about it on paper. The air pressure around the boy was wrong. The grass beneath his feet was dead in a perfect circle, scorched by ambient energy he hadn't bothered to contain. The spiritual pressure leaking off him in waves made Kakashi's Sharingan itch beneath its headband cover, like a wound sensing infection nearby. Naruto looked at Kakashi the way an emperor looks at someone who wandered into the throne room uninvited and started rearranging the furniture without asking. "You weak, pathetic fool." The dual-layered voice rolled across the training ground, and Kakashi felt it in his ribs. His eye crinkled. The reflex still worked. The muscle memory of casual indifference firing on autopilot, even as every combat sensor in his body went to red alert. He drew a kunai. The motion was smooth, instant, and carried 17 years of Anbu-trained lethality behind it. He hit a speed blitz. Full output, maximum velocity, the kind of movement that made Jonin-level opponents blink and miss and die. He closed the distance between himself and Naruto in a fraction of a second. Kunai angled for a disabling slash across the collarbone, his body a blur that Sasuke, gifted with reflexes beyond his peers, barely registered as motion. Naruto glowed green. The shadow charge erupted from his body, a full-body ram of compressed soul energy, emerald and devastating, the outline of his form wrapped in a shell of green force that expanded outward and hit Kakashi's chest like a freight train made of solidified spite. The sound it made on impact was less a crack and more a detonation, a concussive boom that flattened the grass in a 30-foot radius and sent birds scattering from every tree in the training ground. Kakashi's ribs broke. Multiple ribs, simultaneously, the structural integrity of his torso hailing against a force that was never meant to be survived at this range. His body went backward. Through a solid oak tree that exploded into splinters on contact, the trunk shattering around his passage like it was made of balsa wood. He landed in the dirt 40 feet from where he'd started, sliding another 10 feet through grass and soil, leaving a trench in the earth. The tree, ancient, thick enough that 3 people holding hands could barely circle it, toppled. It fell in the direction Kakashi had traveled, crashing into the undergrowth with a sound like the world's largest domino going over. Naruto walked over at a pace that said hurrying was beneath him. His boots, armored, green-trimmed, materialized the same way everything he wore was materialized, left imprints in the earth that were deeper than boots should leave. He reached the wreckage of the oak. Kakashi lay in a crater of his own making, his flak jacket torn open across the chest, blood at the corner of his mouth, his one visible eye staring straight up at the sky through the hole in the canopy where the tree used to be. His orange book had landed 6 feet to his left, pages fluttering in the breeze of its own fall. Naruto reached down and pulled both bells off Kakashi's belt. The motion was unhurried, contemptuous. He held the bells up, looked at them with an expression that said he had conquered civilizations, and these 2 pieces of metal were the most insultingly small trophy he had ever been offered. And then he dropped them in the dirt. "If you wish to serve me, You will learn to fight, or I will execute you." The words landed on the training ground like stones dropped into still water. Kakashi lay in the wreckage and stared at the sky and tried to remember how to breathe with broken ribs and a sternum that felt like it had been kicked by a horse the size of a building. His mind, brilliant, tactical, the mind of a man who had copied 1,000 jutsu and survived 1,000 impossible situations, was blank. He had zero idea how to write this in his report. The exam was over. Something fundamental had shifted. The ground rules of Team 7's existence had been established in 7 seconds, and they bore zero resemblance to anything Kakashi had experienced in his entire career. Sasuke stood at the edge of the clearing. He had watched the entire thing, the speed blitz, the green explosion, the trajectory of Kakashi's body through solid wood, the casual walk, the bells dropped in dirt. His fists were clenched at his sides hard enough that his fingernails had drawn blood from his palms. His jaw was set so tight a tendon in his neck stood out like a cable. His eyes were wide, the width of revelation, the width of a boy who has measured himself against legends his entire life and just watched the scale get thrown off a cliff. The pride was still there, the ambition was still there. But underneath both of them, something new had arrived. A fear that bypassed logic and spoke directly to his survival instinct. A knowledge that the universe had placed him on a team with something that existed outside his category of understanding. He had spent every waking moment since the massacre training to kill his brother, training to become the strongest, training to earn the right to call himself an avenger. And a boy his age had just put Kakashi Hake through a tree with a technique that looked like anger given physical form, and then walked over and taken the bells like he was picking flowers. Sakura gripped her own arm hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. Her mouth was open, but empty. Whatever sound she had intended to make had gotten lost somewhere between her brain and her lips. Her legs were shaking. She wanted to move closer to Sasuke for comfort and further from Naruto for survival, and her body compromised by remaining completely still, trembling, rooted to the spot by the primal understanding that movement attracts predators. Kakashi sat up slowly. Pieces of bark fell from his back. He looked at the 2 bells lying in the dirt 6 inches from Naruto's boot, and he thought about the lesson he had planned. Teamwork, cooperation, the will of fire, and every word of it turned to ash in his mind. There was no teamwork exercise here. There was a king, and there were subjects, and the hierarchy had been established with zero ambiguity in a single exchange. He reached for his orange book. His hand trembled as he picked it up. He tucked it away, and he filed the incident report that evening, using language so understated that the Hokage would have laughed if laughing hadn't felt dangerous in the current atmosphere of the village. Team 7 took the escort mission to the Land of Waves 3 weeks later. Tazuna the bridge builder arrived at the mission desk, smelling like cheap sake and cheaper decisions. And the assignment went to Kakashi's team, because the assignment went to Kakashi's team, and nobody in the administrative chain wanted to think too hard about why. Naruto viewed the Land of Waves the way Shao Kahn had viewed every unconquered territory in his millennial existence, as an extension of his empire that simply hadn't been informed of its status yet. He accompanied Team 7 the way an emperor accompanies an expedition, present at the center, dominant in every formation, and wholly uninterested in the briefing that Kakashi delivered while walking. The words C rank and escort and protect the client washed over him like rain over granite. Tazuna existed in Naruto's peripheral awareness the way a piece of furniture exists, present, useful in a limited capacity, beneath direct attention. The road to wave country cut through forest, then coastline, then fog. The fog thickened as they crossed the water, rolling in from the east in banks so dense that visibility dropped to arm's length. Kakashi's posture changed, his shoulders drawing in, his hand drifting toward his kunai pouch, his one visible eye narrowing. Sasuke noticed, Sakura noticed, Sasuke noticing. Tazuna began to sweat. Naruto walked through the fog at the same pace. He could feel it, the killing intent buried in the moisture, the weight of a dangerous presence pressing against the mist like a fist inside a silk glove. He smiled. The expression carried zero warmth. In all the anticipation of a hunter who has caught a scent, they reached the bridge. Half finished, stretching out over gray water, the concrete and rebar of it skeletal and incomplete. The fog sat on the bridge like a living thing, wet and heavy and tasting of iron. Zabuza Momochi appeared. He dropped from the mist the way nightmares drop from the ceiling of a child's bedroom, sudden, massive, inevitable. 7 feet of killing intent wrapped in bandages and bare muscle, the executioner's blade strapped to his back, his eyes carrying the flat, dead light of a man who had graduated his ninja academy by murdering every single one of his classmates. The demon of the hidden mist. A-rank missing Nin, one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. A legend by any standard the shinobi world had to offer. He stepped off the crossbar of the blade where he'd been perched and landed on the bridge with a sound like a coffin lid closing. The killing intent rolled off him in waves, thick, suffocating, the kind of bloodlust that makes academy students freeze and shunin hesitate and career jonin reach for their A-game. Sakura dropped to her knees. Sasuke's hand shook so badly he could barely hold his kunai. Even Kakashi, broken ribs healed, dignity partially reconstructed, shifted into a defensive stance that said this was going to be a fight for his life. Zabuza looked at the group. His eyes found Naruto. Something in his expression flickered, confusion, maybe, or recognition, or the first warning pulse of something that would become fear if given enough time. He dismissed it. He was Zabuza Momochi. He did what he did, and fear was a word other people used. He drew the executioner's blade. It came off his back in a sweeping arc, a horizontal swing at neck height, the massive cleaver carving through the fog with a whistle that sounded like the last thing many people had ever heard. It was aimed at Naruto, the full weight of a weapon designed to execute, to sever, to end, to close the book on whatever story its target had been trying to tell. Naruto caught it. His right hand came up and closed around the flat of the blade mid-swing, and the metal screamed. The sound it made, iron against flesh that was harder than iron, was the sound of a material being forced past its structural limit by something it was never engineered to encounter. The blade bent. The edge folded inward under the grip of a conqueror's fist, the iron compressing like aluminum under a hydraulic press. Zabuza's momentum stopped dead. His arms jerked in their sockets. His feet slid backward 3 inches on the concrete as the kinetic energy of his own swing reflected back into his body through the handle. Naruto held the bent blade at arm's length. Zabuza was still attached to the handle, still gripping it with both hands, his eyes above the bandage mask, blown wide enough that the white showed all the way around. "You call yourself a demon?" The dual-layered voice hit Zabuza's face from 3 feet away, and the bandages across his jaw fluttered from the force of it. The contempt in those 4 words was absolute. The contempt of something that had fought actual demons, consumed actual demons, built thrones from the skulls of actual demons, and found them insufficient decoration. Naruto summoned the Wrath Hammer. The sound of it materializing filled the bridge. The low, resonant hum of soul energy compressing from light into matter, particles spiraling inward, the air distorting around the point of creation, the way air distorts above hot pavement. It arrived in his left hand, massive and burning green, and humming with a frequency that made the rebar in the bridge vibrate in sympathy. Zabuza saw it coming. His combat instincts, honed over 3 decades of killing, screamed at him to move, to dodge, to substitute, to do anything except remain standing where he was standing. He was too slow. Naruto swung the Wrath Hammer into Zabuza's chest. The impact was, there are no adequate comparisons. It was the sound of a mountain disagreeing with the existence of a valley. The crack of it echoed off the water and came back from the far shore 3 seconds later. Zabuza's body left the bridge at a velocity that turned him into a ballistic object, his trajectory carrying him over the railing, across 60 feet of open air, and into the surface of the lake below, with a force that split the water in a perfect V-shaped wake. He skipped once, twice, 3 times across the surface like a stone thrown by a giant, each bounce sending up a plume of white water 20 feet high, before the lake finally accepted his entry and swallowed him in a geyser of displaced liquid. Kakashi's face went blank. Every expression he owned got overwritten by the same total system failure he had experienced at the Bell test. His headband had written up slightly, his Sharingan exposed behind it, the red eye spinning frantically as it tried to make sense of what it had just recorded. Speed, incalculable. Force, beyond scale. Duration of engagement, under 4 seconds. Conclusion, Zabuza Momochi, one of the 7 swordsmen, a nightmare given human form, a man who had terrorized countries, had been swatted off a bridge like an insect. The water where Zabuza had landed was still settling. Waves radiated outward in concentric rings, slapping against the bridge supports. Somewhere beneath the surface, the demon of the mist was dealing with the novel experience of having his entire rib cage compressed by a weapon that had never existed in any jutsu classification in any nation's recorded history. Naruto set the wrath hammer on his shoulder and watched the water with an expression that said he was willing to wait. But the amount of waiting he was willing to do was limited, and the consequences of testing that limit were going to be spectacular. They finished the walk to Wave Country with Zabuza unconscious and dragged behind them courtesy of Kakashi's water-walking retrieval. Haku, the masked hunter nin, loyal to Zabuza beyond reason or self-preservation, had appeared at the lake's edge with medical supplies and terror in her eyes and submitted to the group's custody without a single word of resistance. She had seen the swing. She had seen the trajectory. Whatever plan she and Zabuza had been operating under was gone, replaced by the immediate survival priority of keeping her master alive long enough to breathe on his own again. The days in Wave passed. Tazuna continued building the bridge. Gado's shadow hung over the country. The shipping magnate, the slaver, the small man with enormous resources who had choked an entire nation's economy because he could, and because the profit margins justified his conscience. Naruto registered his existence the way a king registers a bandit who has been operating within his borders. The response was never in question, only the timing. Gado brought his army to the finished bridge on a gray morning. They arrived from the far end, a wall of bodies, mercenaries and hired killers, enough men to fill a small battlefield. They carried swords and clubs and the kind of confidence that comes from numbers. Gado stood behind them, short and round, and smiling the smile of a man who has never personally fought anything larger than a contract and believes this makes him invincible by proxy. Naruto's eyes went wide. His lips pulled back from his teeth. The expression on his face was something that should never appear on a 12-year-old's features. The pleasure of a conqueror seeing a target-rich environment. The green light began to pulse from his body, slow at first, then building. The soul energy rising off his skin in waves that made the fog retreat. He walked forward, alone, past Kakashi, past Sasuke, past Sakura, past the healed Zabuza, who was leaning on the rail with his reconstructed blade and watching with the expression of a man observing a natural disaster unfold from a safe distance. Naruto walked toward the army, and the army watched him come. And for 4 seconds, nobody on either side of the bridge understood what was about to happen. The light spears began firing. They launched from Naruto's palms in rapid succession. Javelins of pure emerald soul energy, each one 2 feet long and burning with green fire. The first one punched through 3 mercenaries in a line. Entrance chest, exit back, next body, exit back, next body, done. 3 men fell in a single throw. The second spear took 4. The third took 2. But the second of those 2 was wearing chest armor that should have stopped the strike, and the armor melted around the entry point like butter around a heated blade. Panic hit the army like a wave. It started at the front. The men who could see what was happening, who could see the green light and the bodies dropping, and the impossible physics of a child killing professional soldiers with energy constructs that had 0 equivalent in any jutsu library on the continent. It spread backward through the formation in a ripple. Voice by voice, scream by scream, the realization propagating through 200 men that the thing they were fighting had 0 category in the vocabulary they had been given when they signed up for this work. Some ran. The smart ones ran. The ones in the back who could still turn around, who hadn't been locked in by the press of bodies, who valued their lives more than Gado's coin. They broke and scattered and fled down the far end of the bridge and disappeared into the fog. The ones trapped at the front had fewer options and less time. Naruto walked through them. The Wrath Hammer materialized, and he swung it in sweeping arcs that sent bodies flying off both sides of the bridge into the water below. Each impact sounded like the world's largest drum being struck by the world's most committed drummer. The bridge shook. The concrete cracked under the hammer's landing zones. Green skulls, glowing, luminescent, trailing emerald wisps, began to rise from the fallen in clusters, 5, 10, 15. They streamed toward Naruto in rivers of light, the soul consumption pulling them in with each breath, feeding the Emperor's reservoir, amplifying the glow until he was less a boy and more a green sun walking through a field of dying men. In 90 seconds, the army was gone. The bridge was cleared, bodies in the water on both sides, survivors running to the fog on the far shore, green energy still crackling in the air like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. The concrete was cracked and scorched in a path down the center that looked like something had dragged a burning plow through it. Gato stood alone at the far end. His smile was gone. His mercenaries were gone. His leverage was gone. He was a small man in an expensive suit, standing on a broken bridge, watching something from outside his understanding walk toward him. And for the first time in his career of ruining lives from behind a desk, the consequences of his actions were approaching him at a walking pace and wearing a skull mask. He ran. He made it 4 steps. Naruto covered the remaining distance in a movement that was less a step and more a displacement, his body simply existing in the space Gato was trying to flee from. A hand, armored, enormous, radiating green energy, closed around Gato's throat and lifted him off the ground. Gato's feet kicked. His hands scrabbled at the fingers around his windpipe. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened and closed like a fish discovering the concept of air deprivation. Naruto held him at arm's length and spoke with the dual-layered voice that vibrated the very bones of the bridge. Feel the wrath of Shao Kahn. The soul rip started. Green energy began peeling out of Gato's chest. Visible, tangible, a ribbon of emerald light being drawn from the center of his body through his clothes and his skin and his sternum. Gato screamed. The sound he made existed in a register that human throats were never built to produce. Higher than pain, higher than terror. A sound from the place beyond, both where the soul itself is being separated from its vessel, and the body knows, on every level from cellular to spiritual, that it is dying in a way that goes beyond death. Then silence. Gato's body went limp. The green skull, his soul, his essence, the sum total of everything Gato had ever been, hovered for a moment in the air between them before Naruto drew it in with a breath. The soul consumption completed. Naruto dropped the empty body on the bridge. It hit the concrete with a sound like a sack of wet sand. He turned. Zabuza stood 30 feet away, leaning on the executioner's blade, reconstructed now, hammered back into shape by a blacksmith in Wave who had done the work for free, because refusing felt inadvisable. Beside him, Haku stood with her mask removed, her young face carrying the expression of someone who has watched their understanding of the world get dismantled and rebuilt in real time. Zabuza was soaked. He was broken. 3 of his ribs were still healing. The bruise on his chest from the Wrath Hammer's impact was the size of a dinner plate and colored in shades of black and purple that painters would struggle to mix. He met Naruto's eyes. The green gaze hit him like a physical weight, and every survival instinct Zabuza Momochi possessed, every instinct that had kept him alive through the bloody misgraduation, through years as a missing 9, through assassination attempts and betrayals, and the endless violence of a life spent on the wrong side of every border, fired simultaneously. They all said the same thing. They all said, "This is real power. This is the genuine article. This is what it looks like when strength has no ceiling and mercy has no floor, and the only decision available is which side of the line you stand on." Naruto gave him the only offer he ever made anyone. "Serve me, and I will give you a realm to rule. Defy me, and you will share his fate." He gestured at Gato's corpse. The empty eyes of the shipping magnate stared at the gray sky. His soul was gone. Whatever afterlife existed for men like him, if he would arrive there hollowed out and screaming, Zabuza thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of a man who had survived his entire life by reading power accurately, by knowing when to fight and when to fold, when to swing the blade and when to bow the head. He had read power his whole life. He had never read anything like this. He drove the executioner's blade point first into the bridge concrete and dropped to one knee. His head bowed, his right fist pressed to the ground. Haku followed. Her knee hit the concrete half a second after his. Her head bent, her hands folded in her lap. The loyalty she had devoted to Zabuza extended now, upward toward the things Zabuza himself had submitted to. The chain of command was established. The hierarchy was set. The Land of Waves was the first colony of the new Outworld. Behind them, at the other end of the bridge, the civilians watched. Tazuna, the bridge builder, the man who had set this entire chain of events in motion with a lie about his mission's danger level, stood with his mouth hanging open and his flask dangling, forgotten from one hand. The workers beside him, men with rough hands and rougher lives who had come to finish a bridge, stared at the scene in the kind of silence that only arrives when reality exceeds every framework available for processing it. Women stood behind them. Children peered around their mothers' legs. They had come out to watch the bridge get completed. They had come to witness the culmination of their country's hope, the physical connection to the mainland that Gado had tried to prevent, the structure that represented freedom and commerce and a future beyond starvation. Instead, they watched their country change hands. The demon of the mist, the boogeyman, the monster from the stories, the reason mothers in Wave told their children to stay indoors when the fog was thick, was on his knees. A boy who looked like a war god stood over him. Gado was dead on the ground between them, and the manner of his death was beyond anything the civilian's experience could explain. Tazuna took a drink from his flask, then another. Then he sat down on the bridge railing because his legs refused to hold him any longer and stared at the scene and tried to figure out what his country was now. The conclusion he reached, slowly, reluctantly, with the full weight of an aging man's pragmatism, was that it was alive. His country was alive. The method of its survival was terrifying, and the shape of its future was uncertain, and the power structure that had just been established over it was beyond his comprehension, but it was alive, and yesterday that had been in question. He took another drink. They returned to Konoha. Naruto led the formation the way a king leads a march back from a successful campaign. Zabuza and Haku walked behind him, the first soldiers of a growing army, the first pieces on a board that Naruto was only beginning to arrange. Kakashi walked behind them and said nothing, and felt the shape of the world changing around him, and understood that his job had evolved from sensei to witness. Sasuke walked at the back and burned. Months slid by. Missions happened. D ranks that Naruto ignored, C ranks that Naruto completed by walking through them, the occasional B rank that the Hokage assigned out of something that was either desperation or morbid curiosity. The village adjusted. Adjusted is a generous word. The village survived in Naruto's proximity the way a town at the base of a volcano survives between eruptions. Everyone knew what lived among them. Everyone knew the green glow that sometimes escaped from his apartment windows at night. Everyone felt the pressure that walked the streets in the shape of a 12-year-old boy who looked 30 and moved like something from an older, meaner world. The Chunin exams arrived with the summer heat, and Naruto treated them the way Shao Kahn had always treated tournaments, as a mechanism for identifying which warriors deserved to continue existing and which ones deserved to be erased from memory. The exams were a filter, a stage, an arena where the weak revealed themselves through failure and the strong proved themselves through domination, and both outcomes served the Emperor's purposes. The written exam was first. Ibiki Morino, scarred head, leather coat, the kind of interrogation specialist who made enemy intelligence agents develop insomnia, stood at the front of the exam room and delivered his speech about rules and consequences and the penalty for cheating. His voice carried authority. His presence commanded the room. Every genin in attendance felt the weight of his reputation pressing down on them. Naruto sat in his assigned seat and stared at Ibiki without blinking. The green eyes burned across the room. The weight of the Emperor's attention, focused, unrelenting, absolute, hit Ibiki like a spotlight made of pressure. The scarred man faltered, mid-sentence. His mouth opened to deliver the next rule, and the words evaporated somewhere between his brain and his tongue. He blinked, He looked down at his notes. He looked back up. Naruto was still staring. The dual glow of those eyes hadn't diminished. If any, it had intensified. The green growing brighter, the pressure growing heavier, the air in Ibiki's immediate vicinity growing thicker. Ibiki moved on. He stumbled over the next sentence, recovered, and finished his briefing at twice the speed he'd planned. And when it was over, he retreated to the proctor's table at the front with the expression of a man who had just discovered that his professional expertise in intimidation was a campfire in the presence of a sun. The forest of death followed. Anko Mitarashi, snake summoner, former student of Orochimaru, the kind of woman who ate dango on top of corpses and smiled for the photos, gave her introduction at the gate. She threw a kunai. She licked blood. She did the whole performance. Naruto watched her the way an audience watches a street performer. Mild interest, absolute superiority, the patience of a man who has seen better shows and stayed to be polite. They entered the forest. Team 7 moved through the trees at Naruto's pace, which was the pace of a warlord surveying contested territory. Forward, steady, and radiating enough ambient power that every predator within a mile radius, human and animal alike, gave them the widest possible berth. The Forest of Death lived up to its name for every team except the one carrying an emperor. Orochimaru came on the second day. He announced himself the way he always announced himself, with theater and excess. The giant snake came first, a summon the size of a building erupting from the forest floor and filling the canopy with its coils. It blocked out the sky. Its scales rustled against tree trunks that snapped like twigs under its weight. Its tongue flickered, tasting the air, tasting the fear, tasting the potential targets arranged below it like appetizers at a dinner party. Then Orochimaru himself materialized on the snake's head. Yellow eyes, pale skin, forked tongue running across lips that curved into a smile designed to make children scream in their sleep. He wore the grass genin disguise, the false face already half shed, his real features emerging beneath it like something molting. He had come for Sasuke, the Sharingan, the body, the vessel he had chosen for his next reincarnation. His plans were meticulous. His intelligence was thorough. His confidence was the confidence of a man who had betrayed one of the 5 great nations and survived, who had experimented on human bodies for decades and thrived, who believed, with absolute conviction, that his mind was the sharpest tool in any room he entered. He looked down from the snake's head and found Naruto looking up at him. The skull mask manifested. It materialized over Naruto's face in segments, green energy solidifying into bone-white armor, the jaw piece extending, the brow ridge hardening, the visor descending over his eyes. His gaze burned through the sockets, twin points of green fire framed by a skull that made him look like death itself had been given a face and a purpose. The transformation was complete in 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds the ambient temperature in their section of forest dropped by 8 degrees. Orochimaru felt it. Something behind his eyes flickered. Interest, maybe. Or the first distant warning bell of something his ego would take another 30 seconds to identify as danger. The giant snake lunged downward, mouth open, fangs extended, the speed of its strike shaking branches loose from every tree in a 100-foot radius. It was meant to terrify. It was meant to establish dominance. It was the opening move of a predator that had never met a larger predator. Naruto leaped. Straight up. Through the canopy, through the branches that shattered around his ascent like they were made of glass, through the leaves that disintegrated in the wake of his passage. He rose above the snake's descending head, the wrath hammer already forming in his right hand, the emerald light of it illuminating the forest canopy from above like a green star going supernova. He brought the wrath hammer down on the snake's skull. The sound was beyond description, beyond thunder, beyond artillery, beyond any comparison that involved things humans built or understood. It was the sound of scale being violated, of a summoned creature the size of a building having its existence renegotiated by a weapon that answered to laws the natural world had never voted on. The snake's skull compressed. Its head was driven downward by the impact with a force that turned its descent into a burial. The massive body hammered into the forest floor so hard that the earth cratered beneath it, trees uprooted in a circle radiating outward, the ground rippling like water from the point of impact. The crater was 50 feet across. The snake, dead, its skull destroyed, its coils still twitching with residual nerve signals, filled the depression like a coiled rope dropped into a bowl. Dust and debris fountained upward and then rained back down over an area the size of a training ground. Branches and leaves and chunks of earth pattered against the canopy for a full 3 seconds after impact. Orochimaru had abandoned the snake's head a half-second before impact, his body flicker carrying him to a branch 30 feet to the left, his yellow eyes wide, his smile gone for the first time in the encounter. He watched his enormous summon get hammered into the earth in a single blow and went completely still. The stillness of a predator reassessing. The stillness of a genius who has just encountered data that contradicts his model. Then he extended his neck. Because Orochimaru was the kind of man who believed in his plan past the point where the plan deserved to be believed in. His neck stretched, elongating like a snake's body, pale skin sliding over vertebrae that multiplied as they went, his head rocketing forward on a pillar of flesh aimed directly at Sasuke's position, mouth open, the curse mark seal visible on his tongue, ready to bite, ready to brand, ready to claim. Naruto caught him by the throat mid-lunge. The hand closed around the elongated neck at its midpoint. 4 feet from Orochimaru's face, the armored fingers sinking into flesh that was supposed to be supernatural and finding it inadequate. The neck stopped extending. The head jerked to a halt in midair, 3 feet short of Sasuke, tongue still extended, eyes going wider than the yellow irises could accommodate. Naruto held him the way you hold a garden hose that's gotten out of control. One hand, contemptuous grip. The green energy crackling around his fingers was burning the skin beneath them. The smell of cooking flesh mixing with the forest air. You attempt to poison an emperor with a snake's bite? The words carried the dual-layer resonance that made the bark on nearby trees vibrate loose. Orochimaru's eyes, pinned in their sockets, his head immobilized by the grip on his neck, managed to swivel toward the source of the voice. What they found was the skull mask, the burning green eyes behind it. The absolute absence of anything resembling concern or effort or engagement on the level of an equal. The punch came from Naruto's free hand. It connected with Orochimaru's jaw at a velocity that turned the impact into a localized explosion. The crack of bone breaking was audible from 100 feet away, sharp and final as a gunshot. The jaw went sideways. The cheekbone behind it shattered. No. The cheekbone behind it broke into fragments that rearranged the geometry of Orochimaru's face. His eyes rolled. Blood sprayed from the impact zone in a mist that caught the fractured light filtering through the ruined canopy. Before Orochimaru could process the hit, before his famous regeneration could engage, before his contingency jutsu could activate, before his genius-level tactical mind could formulate a response, Naruto fired, point blank, full output. A blast of green soul energy at center mass, the light spear technique condensed into a wide beam variant that hit Orochimaru's torso from 3 feet away. The impact erased everything from his collarbones to his waist. Flesh, bone, organs, the spine itself, gone. Converted into energy scatter and biological debris that sprayed backward through the trees in a fan. What remained of Orochimaru, head, neck, one shoulder, and everything below the waist, separated and fell. And then because Orochimaru was Orochimaru and death was a negotiation rather than a destination for him, the remains began to move. The mouth opened and a second Orochimaru slithered out, covered in bile and regeneration fluid, smaller, paler, his eyes burning with something that had evolved past fear into a territory that fear and fury shared a border. He fled, into the trees, into the shadows of the forest canopy, scrambling and sliding and moving with the graceless speed of a predator that has discovered it is prey. Naruto watched him go. Then he pointed. One finger extended toward the retreating blur that used to be one of the 3 most dangerous people in the elemental nations, and he laughed. The laugh of Shao Kahn, iconic, booming, filling the forest of death from floor to canopy like a war horn sounded in victory. It bounced off trees. It scattered birds that had already been scattered. It carried across half the forest and reached teams that were fighting for survival miles away, freezing them in place with the irrational certainty that whatever had just made that sound was laughing at them too. "You suck!" The words landed on the ruined clearing like a headstone engraving. Final. Absolute. A two-word obituary for one of the Sanin's reputation. Sasuke stood in the aftermath. He was standing 12 feet behind Naruto, in the space where Orochimaru's head had been aimed, in the spot where the curse mark bite would have landed if the elongated neck had reached him. His Sharingan was active, spinning, recording, burning every detail of what he just witnessed into the permanent archive of his visual memory. His hands hung at his sides. His face carried an expression that was difficult to read and impossible to forget. This was the moment. This was the moment Sasuke Uchiha's inferiority complex ignited into something that would burn down everything it touched. He had spent his life measuring himself against his brother, Itachi, the ghost, the genius, the monster who had erased their entire family in a single night. He had built his identity around the pursuit of power sufficient to kill a god. He had trained every day until his knuckles bled and his chakra burned and his body begged for rest. He refused to give it. He had placed himself on a scale and pointed at the top and said, "There! That is where I will stand. That is what I will become." And Naruto, a boy his age, a classmate, someone who sat in the same room as him for years, had just treated Orochimaru like a pest, had swatted a legendary snake summoned into the earth with a single hit, had caught a Sanin by the throat mid-attack and punched his jaw off his face and erased his torso with an energy blast, and then laughed about it, had pointed at the retreating form of one of the three most feared names in all the nations and declared him pathetic with the conviction of someone delivering fact rather than opinion, the crack in Sasuke's foundation, the one that had started at the bell test, the one that had widened on the bridge in Wave, the one that had been spreading through him for months like a fault line through bedrock, reached critical mass. He felt it. He felt the shape of his ambition collide with the shape of his reality and lose. He felt the temperature of his conviction change, from the cold flame of a patient avenger to the volatile heat of something desperate, something hungry, something willing to abandon every principle and every allegiance and every last shred of what he was supposed to be in pursuit of enough power to stop feeling small. He said nothing. His Sharingan spun. He filed the moment away. And the timer started, invisible, inaudible, but counting down toward a destination that Orochimaru would exploit and the Valley of the End would host. The Chunin exam finals arrived 3 weeks later. The stadium was full, civilians and shinobi alike. The stands packed with spectators who had traveled from across the nations to witness the cream of the next generation prove themselves in single combat. The Kazekage sat in the VIP box beside the Hokage. Jonin lined the walls. Anbu perched on rooftops. The air tasted like anticipation and grilling meat and the particular electricity of a crowd that has paid for violence and expects to receive it. Naruto's preliminary rounds had been, there was no word for what they had been. Anticlimactic implies they were ever expected to be climactic. His opponents, genin from various villages, some gifted, some genuinely talented, entered the arena and looked at him and understood in their bones that this was over before it began. One forfeited before the proctor could say start. Another lasted 6 seconds and spent 3 weeks in the hospital explaining to the medical staff that the ringing in his ears might be permanent. A third made the mistake of throwing a jutsu, a reasonable fire technique, B rank, well executed, and watched the Emperor's shield materialize in front of Naruto's palm and eat the flames whole without producing so much as smoke. The invasion hit during the final round. The signal came as genjutsu, feathers falling from the sky, a village-wide sleep technique that dropped civilians and low-ranked shinobi where they stood. The Kazekage revealed himself as Orochimaru in disguise, the snake emerging from behind stolen skin, his face still showing the bruises of his last encounter with Naruto, though he pretended otherwise. Sound and sand shinobi poured through the walls. Explosions rocked the perimeter. The barrier went up around the Hokage's box, trapping Hiruzen with the Sanin inside a purple cube of sealing energy. And at the center of the arena, Gaara lost control. The sand started pouring off him in waves, not the controlled, directed sand of a skilled Jinchuriki, but the wild eruption of a seal breaking, a beast escaping, a container failing to hold its contents. His body twisted, his face stretched. The sand consumed him from the feet up, building, expanding, growing. Shukaku's form emerging from the boy like a butterfly, emerging from a chrysalis made of compressed desert and ancient malice. The one-tailed beast erupted, colossal, 30 feet tall and growing, a construct of compressed sand and rage that had been locked in a cage and wanted the world to pay for it. Shukaku roared. The sound hit the stadium like a physical wall. Civilians screamed. Shinobi braced. The Anbu on the perimeter reached for weapons that were never designed to fight this class of threat. The sky above the arena filled with sand, blocking the sun, turning the daylight to a dim amber filter. The beast's tail swept through the upper stands, demolishing a section of seating, sending bodies and concrete raining into the arena floor. Naruto stood at the edge of the debris field. He watched the beast rise. He watched it grow to its full height. 100 feet of sand and fury and compressed killing intent, the kind of entity that features in the nightmares of nations. He watched it, and something in his expression, visible even beneath the skull mask that had materialized over his features, was the expression of a man seeing a challenge for the first time in months and finding the feeling novel. He channeled the nine tails. Kurama's chakra answered the call, rising from behind the seal, from the cage, from the place where the fox had been sleeping and watching and growing increasingly aware that the soul sharing its vessel was something from outside any taxonomy it recognized. The red energy spiraled up through Naruto's body in ribbons, vermilion and burning, the heat of it visible in the air as distortion. It met the green soul magic at his core, and the two forces braided together. The Nine Tails chakra enhancement was a sight that burned itself into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. Red and green spiraling around each other in a double helix, the colors mixing at their boundaries into something that had no name. A third energy, gold-tinged and terrible, radiating from Naruto's body in waves that made the air around him shimmer like a mirage. The ground beneath his boots fractured, cracks spreading outward in a spiderweb pattern, the concrete and earth unable to bear the weight of the combined output. The pressure was visible. The pressure was audible. A low hum that climbed in pitch until it reached a frequency that made noses bleed in a 50-foot radius. Naruto crouched. The ground beneath him compressed downward 2 inches. Then he leaped. Straight up, straight up, straight at Shukaku's face. The trajectory was a green and red comet trailing power like a jet trail, visible from every point in the village, visible from the walls, visible from the tree line beyond. He rose toward the beast with the velocity of a launched missile and the intention of a god choosing a target. Shukaku saw him coming. The beast, ancient, intelligent enough to understand threat assessment, opened its mouth. The wind release gathered, air compressing between its jaws until the pressure was visible as a sphere of distorted atmosphere. It fired. A blast that could level city blocks erupted from Shukaku's mouth and met Naruto's trajectory head-on. The Emperor's shield materialized, a wall of green soul energy, 20 feet wide, burning with emerald fire, solid as anything that had ever existed, appeared in front of Naruto's ascending body. The wind release hit it. The technique, powerful enough to flatten buildings, to strip skin from bone, to end the careers of anything standing in its path, hit the Emperor's shield and was absorbed, gone, consumed. The green wall ate the attack whole without cracking, without flickering, without acknowledging that it had been tested. The shield pulsed brighter. Naruto's ascent continued without a decrease in speed. He landed on Shukaku's forehead. His boots hit the compacted sand and the impact cracked the surface, the beast's own body fracturing beneath his feet like ice under a thrown stone. Shukaku bellowed. Its massive hands rose to swat at the insect on its brow, claws the size of houses descending from both sides. Naruto summoned the Wrath Hammer. The weapon materialized at the apex of an overhead swing, green light compressing into matter at the highest point of the arc, so that by the time the hammer existed fully, it was already descending, already falling, already aimed directly between Shukaku's eyes. It hit. The sound, the deep, resonant crack of the impact, was the loudest thing to happen in Konoha since the Nine Tails attack 13 years prior. It was less a sound and more an event, a seismic notification that something fundamental had occurred. The fracture lines ran down Shukaku's sand armor from the point of impact, spreading like fault lines across a continent, the entire face of the beast splitting into sections, the compressed sand losing its cohesion in cascading failures that ran from the crown to the jaw to the neck. Shukaku understood it was in danger. The realization hit the ancient beast at the same moment the hammer hit its face. The understanding that the thing standing on its head was something from outside the hierarchy of this world, something that answered to rules the tailed beasts had never encountered in their millennia of existence. The beast tried to reform. The sand tried to close the fractures. New material flowed upward from the body to replace what had been broken. Naruto plunged his bare hand through the fractured crown. His arm went into the shoulder, through sand and chakra and the spiritual substrate that held Shukaku's form together. His fingers found Gaara's body inside the construct. The boy suspended in the sand like an insect in amber, unconscious, his face twisted in an expression of pain that was half his and half the beast's. Naruto gripped the back of his shirt and pulled. Gaara came free of the sand with the wet tearing sound of something being separated from something that wanted to keep it. The boy's body emerged from the top of Shukaku's head like a tooth being pulled from a jaw, trailing sand and chakra lines that snapped as he cleared the surface. Then Naruto turned his grip toward the beast itself. His hand, still buried in the fractured sand, closed around something that was neither physical nor spiritual, but existed at the intersection of both. He pulled harder. The soul consumption activated, and instead of a single green skull, what poured out was a river. Emerald light flowed upward from the sand construct, Shukaku's power, its chakra, its life force being drawn out through the fracture in its crown and into Naruto's body. The beast screamed. The sound it made was animal, raw, terrified, the sound of something ancient and powerful experiencing the wholly unfamiliar sensation of being drained. Its form began to collapse. The sand lost cohesion from the top down, sections of the enormous body crumbling like a sandcastle in a rising tide. Shukaku retreated. It fled back into the seal, not willingly, with the desperate speed of a creature trying to put a locked door between itself and a predator. The sand collapsed entirely in a cascade, Naruto riding the crumbling form down with Gaara in one hand, landing on the arena floor in a crouch that cracked the ground in a perfect circle around his feet. Sand rained down around them in a curtain. The sky cleared. Sunlight returned. Naruto dropped Gaara on the ground. The boy landed on his back, unconscious, pale, his sand armor cracked and dispersed, his face slack. He was breathing. The rise and fall of his chest confirmed his continued existence, and the confirmation carried the implication that this was a choice Naruto had made, to leave him alive, rather than an outcome he had been forced to accept. A beast that cannot be controlled is useless to my empire. The dual-layered voice rolled across the arena. Gaara's eyes fluttered open. He stared up at the sky, then at the face above him, the skull mask, the burning green eyes, the absolute absence of concern. And Gaara of the sand, the boy who had never felt fear from another living person, who had spent his entire life being the thing others feared, who had defined himself by his invulnerability and his monster and the absolute certainty that nothing could touch him, experienced the wholly novel sensation of being small. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly. His hands, usually reaching for sand, always reaching for sand, the compulsive reflex of a boy who has never been without his armor, reached and found nothing. The sand refused to respond. Shukaku was silent. The beast that had screamed in his head for 12 years was cowering behind the seal, and for the first time in his memory, Gaara was alone in his own mind and staring up at the face of something that had just ripped his demon halfway out of his body and hadn't broken a sweat. He was afraid. The emotion was so foreign that he barely recognized it. A coldness in his stomach, a weakness in his limbs, a shrinking sensation behind his ribs. He lay on the ground and stared at Naruto and understood. In the deep, wordless way that all living things understand their place in a hierarchy, that he was looking at something above him, above his beast, above anything he had ever imagined himself becoming. On the perimeter of the arena, the Anbu watched. 3 of them, veteran operatives with decades of combined service, stood on the wall with their masks hiding expressions that would have been worth recording for posterity. One of them, Bear Mask, 17 years of service, veteran of 2 wars, had his hand on his sword hilt and could feel the blade trembling against his palm. His legs had given up the pretense of professional steadiness and were shaking at the knee. He had watched a 12-year-old boy leap onto the head of a tailed beast, hit it with a hammer until its face broke, rip the jinchuriki out of it like pulling a weed, and then drain the beast's power until it retreated into its seal screaming. He had watched this happen in under 90 seconds. He had never seen anything that he had fewer words for. Jonin stood in the rubble of the partially destroyed stadium. Asuma Sarutobi, son of the 3rd, veteran, a man who smoked because it gave his hands something to do besides tremble, had his cigarette hanging from his lower lip unlit. He had forgotten to light it. He had forgotten the invasion was happening. He was staring at the arena floor where Naruto stood over Gaara's prone form and trying to integrate what he'd seen into his existing model of reality, and the model kept rejecting the input. Might Guy, the beautiful green beast of Konoha, a man who measured power and physical output and respected nothing more than martial excellence, stood beside Asuma with tears running down his face. The tears were neither joy nor sorrow. They were the tears of a man watching something so far beyond his frame of reference that his body defaulted the only response it could produce. His mouth moved. The words youth and flames were probably in there somewhere, but the sound never reached his lips. The invasion collapsed after that. Without Shukaku, without the beast that was supposed to be the centerpiece of the assault, the weapon that would turn the tide, the trump card that would justify the entire gamble of attacking one of the 5 great nations, the Sands' military contribution evaporated. The Sound Forces, already outmatched without their giant weapon, broke and ran. The barrier around the Hokage's box fell when Orochimaru retreated. The snake saw Shukaku collapse from his position above the arena and made the calculation that the entity responsible for that collapse was still in the village and might decide to look up. Konoha survived. The dead were buried. The buildings were rebuilt. The paperwork was filed. And underneath all of it, like a river running beneath a city's foundations, Sasuke Uchiha was falling. The weeks after the invasion were the weeks where Sasuke's descent became visible to anyone paying attention. His training intensified, hours becoming entire days, his knuckles splitting and healing and splitting again, his Sharingan spinning through technique after technique with the desperate speed of someone trying to fill a gap they can feel widening. He stood on the training grounds at midnight and poured chakra into his hands until the lightning came. And the lightning was never enough, was never close to enough, was never going to be close to enough because the scale had changed. He had measured himself against Itachi. That was hard enough. That was a mountain that most people would call impossible. But the mountain at least existed within a comprehensible framework. Itachi was a genius, the greatest genius the Uchiha had ever produced. But he was a shinobi. He operated within the rules of chakra and technique and physical limitation. He could be surpassed. The gap was enormous, but it was a gap. It had a distance, and distances could be closed. What Naruto was had no gap to close because it existed outside the measurement system. It was a different axis entirely, a different category of existence. Sasuke could train for 1,000 years and climb to the absolute peak of shinobi power and still be operating on a different floor of the building than whatever Naruto was on. Orochimaru's messenger found him on a Wednesday. The Sound Four arrived at the Uchiha compound at nightfall. 4 bodies, 4 cursed seals, 4 sets of eyes that carried the yellow tint of the snake's influence. They brought a message: power. Enough power to surpass his brother waiting for him in the Sound Village if he was willing to leave everything behind and reach for it. They brought the promise. They brought the temptation. They brought exactly what Sasuke needed to hear at exactly the moment he was most willing to hear it. He left at midnight. Backpack. Headband left on the dresser. One last look at the village gates. The village that had been his home. The village that had watched him grow. The village that contained Naruto Uzumaki and therefore contained the reason he was leaving. And then he turned and walked into the trees and didn't look back. They sent a team after him. The Rookie 9, assembled in pieces. Shikamaru leading because Shikamaru was the tactician and someone had to think. They pursued. They fought the Sound Four along the route. Battles at intervals like stations on a railway to oblivion. Each member of the retrieval team peeling off to handle an opponent, the formation shrinking as the distance to the border closed. Naruto went alone. He separated from the group before they even reached the forest's edge. He had zero interest in the Sound Four. They were pawns, obstacles, speed bumps. His attention was fixed on Sasuke the way a king's attention fixes on a deserter. The concept of friendship had never taken root in the soil of Shao Kahn's soul. What Naruto felt towards Sasuke was something else. Ownership, maybe, or entitlement, or the fury of an emperor watching a soldier under his banner attempt to defect to the same enemy he had already humiliated once. He traveled fast. Faster than the Sound Four could move. Faster than Sasuke could run. He arrived at the Valley of the End while the Sound Four were still fighting the retrieval team miles behind. The valley at night was a monument to ancient violence. Two massive stone statues flanking a waterfall that dropped 100 feet into a river basin below. Hashirama Senju on one side, Madara Uchiha on the other. Their stone faces stared at each other across the falling water with expressions that had been carved to capture something about destiny and conflict and the eternal nature of opposition. The waterfall roared between them. The spray caught moonlight and turned it to mist. Rain started falling as Naruto arrived at the lip of the valley. It came in sheets, heavy, driving, the kind of rain that sounds like static and turns the world into a watercolor of gray and black. It soaked his armor in seconds. It ran down the skull mask that materialized over his face. It caught the green glow of his eyes and scattered it across the raindrops in his immediate vicinity, turning the precipitation around him into a field of falling emerald sparks. Sasuke stood at the base of the waterfall on the water's surface. His curse mark was active. Level 1, the black flame pattern spreading across half his face, one hand crackling with chakra he was gathering for a fight he knew was coming. He had felt Naruto approaching the way all living things feel an approaching storm, in the pressure change, in the static electricity, in the primitive brainstem certainty that the weather was about to become lethal. He turned and looked up. Naruto stood at the top of the falls. The rain fell around him. The sky above him was turning. The clouds directly overhead shifting color from storm gray to sickly green as his power bled into the atmosphere, the soul energy escaping upward and staining the rainfall emerald for 100 feet in every direction. He looked down at Sasuke the way a king looks down from a battlement at a traitor who has been dragged back to the gates. You dare turn your back on your emperor for a pathetic snake? The dual-layered voice cut through the rain and the waterfall and the thunder beginning to roll across the valley. Each word was an indictment. Each syllable carried the weight of absolute authority betrayed. And beneath that, so far beneath it, that you had to know what to listen for. A note of something that might have been hurt if hurt was a word that applied to conquerors. Sasuke's jaw tightened. His Sharingan spun, 3 tomoe in each eye, fully matured, recording everything, processing threat assessments that all returned the same result, unfavorable, massively unfavorable. But the curse mark was singing in his blood, and Orochimaru's promise was ringing in his ears, and the desperation that had driven him out of the village gates was louder than his survival instinct, louder than the evidence of his own eyes. He activated level 2. The transformation was ugly. The curse mark spread, consuming his entire body in a wave of gray-black coloration, his skin changing texture and temperature, his frame expanding. Wings erupted from his back, bone-white, bat-like, tearing through his shirt with wet sounds, stretching outward until they caught the rain. His hair grew. His eyes went black and gold. The cursed chakra poured off him in waves that made the water beneath his feet boil. He was powerful. Level 2 curse mark, Sasuke was, by any reasonable metric, an extraordinary threat. A rank at minimum, the kind of power output that could match most jonin, that could challenge most threats the shinobi world produced. He was faster than he'd ever been, stronger than he'd ever been. The Chidori gathered in his left hand, black Chidori, corrupted by the curse mark's influence, the lightning going wrong and volatile, screaming in frequencies that made the rain evaporate around his arm. He launched. The wings beat once, a propulsive stroke that accelerated him to a speed beyond what legs alone could produce. He rocketed upward toward Naruto's position at the top of the falls. The black Chidori extended in his left hand, the lightning volatile and wrong. His trajectory a black streak against the green-stained rain. He was fast. He was genuinely dangerously fast. Fast enough that most shinobi alive would have failed to react, would have felt the Chidori punch through their chest before their eyes registered the motion. Naruto summoned the Wrath Hammer. The weapon materialized with a sound that had become familiar to everyone who had ever heard it and survived. The low hum, the compression of light into matter, the crackling of soul energy taking form. It appeared in both hands this time, Naruto gripping the shaft with the stance of someone who has swung this weapon 1,000,000 times across 10,000 worlds and knows exactly what it's going to do. He did nothing else. He planted his feet on the wet stone at the cliff's edge. He waited. His posture said, his stance said, arrive. His burning green eyes behind the skull mask watched Sasuke's ascending trajectory with the patience of an executioner who has already chosen the moment of impact. Sasuke arrived. The black Chidori met the Wrath Hammer. The collision was the loudest thing to happen in the elemental nations in living memory. It was heard in 3 countries. It was felt in 4. The shockwave propagated outward from the point of impact in a sphere of destruction that rewrote the geography of the Valley of the End. The waterfall ceased to exist. The water atomized into mist by the concussive force. The river below flattened outward in a ring that left the riverbed exposed for a full 3 seconds before the water rushed back in. The statues cracked, both of them, simultaneously. The stone giants, Hashirama and Madara, carved to endure centuries, built to commemorate an ancient battle between men who were considered the pinnacle of shinobi power, split down the middle. The fracture lines ran from their crowns to their bases in jagged paths that followed the grain of the stone. Hashirama's face broke first, the left side separating from the right, the nose falling in a piece the size of a house, crashing into the depleted riverbed below with a splash that sent a wave to both shores. Madara's face followed, his stone expression splitting between the eyes, the two halves leaning away from each other with the grinding sound of a mountain committing suicide. The shock wave dissipated into the surrounding forest and toppled trees for a quarter mile. Sasuke's arm broke. It broke at the collision point, the forearm shattering where the black Chidori met the Wrath Hammer, the bones failing simultaneously under a force they were never structured to channel. The curse-marked wings were torn apart by the shockwave. Physically ripped from its back, the membranes tearing like wet paper, the bone support snapping, the gray skin separating into fragments that the wind carried away. The cursed chakra dispersed in a burst of purple-black energy that the rain devoured instantly. Sasuke fell. His body dropped from the collision point, limp, one arm ruined, wings gone, curse mark retreating back to its seal in a wave of gray receding into normal skin tone. He hit the shallow water in the depleted riverbed below and stayed there, face up, arms spread, his Sharingan fading, the red going back to black, the tomoe disappearing, his eyes returning to the natural color of a boy who has overreached and paid for it. The rain fell on his face. 6 inches of water covered the riverbed around him, slowly rising as the river refilled. He breathed in short, painful pulls, his ribs bruised, his arm in pieces, his transformation destroyed. He stared at the sky through the rain and watched the green light above him begin to descend. Naruto walked across the water toward him. Each bootstep splashed in the shallow cover. A steady rhythm, unhurried, the pace of someone walking towards something already finished. The Wrath Hammer rested on his shoulder. The green light from his eyes cast twin beams downward through the rain, illuminating the water's surface in emerald, wherever his gaze fell. The skull mask gave nothing away. The rain ran off his armor in rivulets. He reached Sasuke. He stood over the boy, broken, pale, breathing in short gasps, Sharingan gone, one arm at an angle arms were never meant to achieve. The rain fell between them. The ruined statues of Hashirama and Madara loomed above, their split faces watching with blind stone eyes, a long pause. Just the rain falling on water. Just the distant grinding of stone as a piece of Madara's jaw finally broke free and crashed into the valley floor. just the wind through the trees carrying the last echoes of what had happened here toward villages that would spend days wondering what they'd heard. Naruto looked down at Sasuke Uchiha, the last of his clan, the Avenger, the Prodigy, the boy who wanted power so badly he'd sold his loyalty to a snake for the promise of it. He looked at him the way he looked at everything beneath him, with a measured assessment of an emperor deciding what something is worth. "It's official. You suck." The words fell into the silence of the valley. No thunder to compete with them. No waterfall. The falls had been obliterated. Just the rain and the wreckage, and the final verdict of a conqueror delivered to a soldier too broken to respond. Naruto turned around. He walked away from Sasuke. He did not look back. He did not check breathing. He did not reach for a pulse or kneel beside the body or offer a hand or do anything that existed in the vocabulary of a teammate or a friend or a boy from the same village. Those categories had never applied. Those frameworks had never fit the shape of what lived inside Naruto Uzumaki's body. He stepped off the water and onto the rain-soaked bank of the valley. Grass beneath his boots, trees ahead of him, the forest stretching out in every direction. Away from Konoha, away from the village that had raised him like a weapon aimed at the wrong enemies, away from the Hokage's hat and the academy's walls, and the apartment with its single bed and its empty refrigerator, and the silence that had been his childhood before the soul of an emperor made silence into something chosen rather than inflicted. The new Outworld was waiting. It had always been waiting. Patient the way empires are patient. Inevitable the way gravity is inevitable. The elemental nations spread before him in every direction, fragmented, weak, divided into squabbling villages that called themselves great and had never earned the word. 5 nations with 5 leaders with 5 armies that could barely coordinate to stop a single invasion. Cities with walls that crumbled at the touch of real power. Shinobi who thought they were warriors because they'd never met a conqueror. All of it was his. Every acre of forest and every mile of coastline and every village huddled behind its walls, and every border drawn on a map by men who would never have drawn those lines if they'd known what was coming. It was already his. All of it. Every inch. In every way that mattered. The formal notification would follow. It always followed. The conquering happened first. The map changed second. The resistance happened somewhere in between, and the resistance always failed. And the map always changed, and the emperor always sat on the throne that his hammer had built. He walked into the tree line. The rain was still falling. Behind him, in the valley, the cracked statues of Hashirama and Madara stood split in two, monuments to a past that had just become irrelevant. Their broken faces staring at each other across a space where a waterfall used to exist. Sasuke lay in the shallow water below them, breathing, broken, alone. The green light of the Emperor's passage faded into the forest ahead, each step carrying him further from the life of Naruto Uzumaki and deeper into the destiny of Shao Kahn, until the trees closed behind him and the rain filled his footprints, and the Valley of the End earned its name for the second time in history. 2 years passed like weather over stone, visible in effect, invisible in process. The erosion of an old world happening in increments too small for anyone standing inside the system to measure, until the morning they woke up, and half the map belonged to someone else. The elemental nations spent those 2 years discovering what it meant to share a continent with something that had stopped pretending to be part of their framework. Villages heard rumors. Daimyo received reports. Intelligence networks, the invisible webs that connected every hidden village to every other hidden village through layers of deception and counter-deception, carried a single recurring signal through every frequency they operated on. He is moving. He is expanding. He is coming. The Land of Waves had been the first territory, and the Land of Waves remained the template. Zabuza Momochi governed it with the efficiency of a man who understood that his authority derived from a source above him, and that the source above him did not tolerate inefficiency. The former demon of the hidden mist, once a boogeyman, once a horror story told to children in coastal villages, had become an administrator. The executioner's blade hung on his office wall rather than his back. Haku managed the civilian infrastructure beside him with the same devotion she had always offered. redirected upward through the chain of command toward its true terminus. The bridge that Tazuna had built, the Great Naruto Bridge, named by citizens who understood what side their survival was buttered on, carried trade across the water in both directions, and the economy of Wave had tripled in 18 months. 3 smaller nations beyond Wave had submitted without a single blow being exchanged. Their daimyo, men of varying age and varying courage and identical conclusions, had arrived at the emperor's encampment carrying surrender documents written in their own hand. They had seen what happened to nations that waited for the emperor to arrive uninvited. They had done the math. The math said, submit now, on your feet, with your infrastructure intact, or submit later on your knees, in the wreckage of everything you built. Every one of them chose the former. Every one of them left alive and governing their territories under new terms. Naruto sat on a throne of compressed earth and stone, raised, angular, constructed by his own hand from the bedrock of the hillside he had chosen as his temporary seat of power. The green energy that perpetually radiated from his body had seeped into the stone during the months of his occupation, and the throne itself now glowed faintly emerald in the pre-dawn hours, a beacon visible from the valley below. Maps surrounded him, physical maps spread across tables carved from the same hillside, annotated in a hand that carried the penmanship of someone who had been writing conquest orders for 10,000 years across 10,000 different alphabets. The elemental nations lay before him in ink and parchment, and the portions already claimed were marked in green, and the portions remaining were marked in everything else, and the everything else was shrinking. A raven arrived on the 3rd morning of the 2nd year's autumn. The bird was unusual, larger than standard messenger ravens, its feathers carrying a sheen that looked oily in the light, its eyes too intelligent for a bird's. It landed on the arm of the throne without invitation and extended its leg with the mechanical precision of a summoned creature following orders. The scroll attached to its ankle was sealed with a red cloud. Naruto removed the scroll. He read it. The message was brief. The Akatsuki, the organization of S-rank criminals that had been collecting tailed beasts across the continent like a philatelist collects stamps, had been watching. They knew about the Nine Tails. They knew about the Emperor. They had, in the way that only organizations built on arrogance and the assumption of superiority can manage, decided that the appropriate response to the most dangerous being on their continent was a letter of demand. Comply or be extracted. The phrasing was elegant. The threat was real. The signature was a red cloud, and the red cloud meant 9 members of S-rank capability aimed in his direction. Naruto read it. He folded it. He used the corner of the paper to clean beneath one fingernail, the motion unhurried, the disrespect absolute, the gesture carrying the full weight of a being who had received threats from entities that made the Akatsuki look like a children's club and had used those threats as kindling. He placed the folded scroll back in the raven's leg holder and released the bird with a flick of his wrist. The reply required no words. The reply was the raven itself, returning to its sender alive, which was a mercy, carrying a scroll that had been used as a grooming tool, which was an insult. And the combination of mercy and insult was the Emperor's way of saying, I am here. I am waiting. Bring whatever you believe is sufficient and learn otherwise. The raven flew east. Naruto turned his attention back to the map. The next territory on his schedule was the Land of Sound, and the man hiding beneath it owed him a conversation that was 2 years overdue. He found Orochimaru's compound on a morning when the fog hung between the trees like gauze between the teeth of a wound. The Sound Village existed above ground as a collection of buildings that looked temporary by design. Structures built to be abandoned, infrastructure that prioritized escape routes over permanence. Everything of value was underground. Everything Orochimaru cared about. His laboratories, his experiments, his collections of stolen bodies and classified jutsu existed beneath the earth in a network of tunnels that spread under the forest floor like the root system of a poisonous tree. Naruto stood at the perimeter and looked at the compound's front entrance. A reinforced steel door set into a hillside, concealed by jutsu that would have hidden it from anyone operating within the standard framework of shinobi detection. The jutsu did nothing against the Emperor's awareness. The soul energy he radiated interacted with concealment techniques the way sunlight interacts with morning frost. The contact was brief and the frost lost. He did not use the door. The shadow charge ignited around his body. The full body shell of compressed green force wrapping his frame in a cocoon of emerald destruction. He aimed at the wall beside the door and ran. The reinforced stone, 3 feet thick, layered with ceiling arrays, backed by steel plating that had been designed to withstand military-grade explosive tags, lasted approximately as long as wet paper lasts against a thrown torch. The sound of his entry was less an explosion and more a geological disagreement. Stone fragments the size of furniture erupted inward. Steel plating peeled away from the wall like skin from a burn. The tunnel beyond, lit by fluorescent seals embedded in the ceiling, filled with dust and debris and the green glow of something that had just announced its arrival with all the subtlety of an earthquake wearing a crown. Alarms sounded. The compound's security systems, chakra detection arrays, pressure-sensitive floor panels, sealed corridors designed to funnel intruders into kill zones, activated in sequence. Naruto walked through each one. The kill zones killed nothing. The sealed corridors unsealed themselves when the Emperor's fist connected with their mechanisms. The chakra detection arrays detected him and then stopped detecting anything at all because the soul energy feedback burned out their sensor matrices, the way a lightning bolt burns out a house's electrical system. Sound shinobi appeared. They emerged from side corridors with weapons drawn and cursed seals active, and the kind of commitment that comes from serving a master who makes defection impossible. They attacked in teams, coordinated, professional, the formations of trained soldiers operating within their chain of command. The light spears launched from Naruto's palms in rapid sequence. Each javelin of emerald soul energy punched through the formation like a needle through cloth. Entrance chest, exit back, next body, exit back. The green fire converting flesh to energy scatter at the point of contact. 6 sound shinobi fell in the first volley. 8 more fell in the second. The survivors broke formation and fled deeper into the compound, and Naruto let them go, because fleeing soldiers carry messages, and messages carry fear, and fear arrives before an emperor does, and softens the ground for his approach. He descended. The tunnels led downward in spirals, deeper, wider, the construction quality improving as the distance from the surface increased. The laboratories began 3 levels below the entry point. Glass containers filled with preserved specimens lined the walls. Surgical? No. Operating tables with leather restraints occupied alcoves cut into the stone. The smell of formaldehyde and something older, something organic and wrong, hung in the recycled air like a permanent resident that refused eviction. Orochimaru met him on the 5th level. The snake was waiting. He stood at the center of a chamber large enough to host a tournament. Circular, high-ceilinged, the walls carved with ceiling arrays that glowed purple, in patterns too complex for any single lifetime to have designed. He had prepared. 2 years of preparation stood between the Orochimaru who had fled the forest of death, missing most of his torso, and the Orochimaru who stood here now with his hands clasped behind his back and his yellow eyes carrying something that wanted to be confidence and achieved only the appearance of it. His body was different, newer. The host he wore was younger and broader, the muscles of it visible beneath the loose clothing he favored. His chakra reserves had been rebuilt, filled to capacity by whatever processes his laboratories produced. The smile he wore was the same one he had always worn. The smile said, "I have seen what you can do, and I have built accordingly, and you will find me a different proposition today." Manda erupted through the chamber floor. The king of the serpent summons, the largest snake in existence, a creature so enormous that its coils could encircle buildings and its fangs could puncture fortifications, burst upward through the stone beneath Naruto's feet with the force of a living earthquake. The floor shattered. The ceiling cracked. Debris rained in every direction as Manda's massive head rose through the compound like a submarine breaching the ocean's surface, its mouth open, its fangs extended, its eyes, slit-pupilled and ancient and furious at being summoned, fixed on the green glowing figure that stood in the wreckage of the chamber's floor. The snake's body was still emerging from below, coil after coil pushing through the broken stone, each section thicker than a train car, the scales scraping against the tunnel walls with a sound like continents grinding together. The chamber that had been designed for combat was too small to hold Manda's full form. The walls began to crack outward, the structural integrity of the compound failing around the beast's expanding presence. Naruto looked up at the open mouth descending toward him, the fangs, each one 15 feet long, dripping venom that hissed and smoked where it hit the broken floor, and the skull mask manifested over his face. The bone-white segments assembled in sequence, the jawpiece locking, the brow ridge hardening, the green fire of his eyes burning through the sockets with renewed intensity. He summoned the Wrath Hammer. The weapon came together from soul energy with the sound that preceded geography lessons, the low hum building, the green particles spiraling inward, compressing, solidifying into a mass that made the air around it bow outward in a pressure wave. It was larger than it had been in Part 1. 2 years of consumed souls had fed it. The head of the hammer was wider than a doorway, burning with emerald lightning that arced between the impact surfaces, and when its full weight settled into existence, the already broken floor beneath Naruto's boots sank another 3 inches into the earth. He swung upward. The Wrath Hammer connected with the underside of Manda's jaw at the apex of its arc, and the sound it produced was the kind of sound that makes survivors lose their hearing for weeks and their sleep for months. The crack of it was beyond thunder, beyond anything the underground compound's architecture had been designed to contain. The shockwave traveled through Manda's skull and out through the top of the compound, erupting through 3 levels of ceiling and a column of destruction that opened the underground base to the sky above. Daylight poured in through the wound in the earth. Dirt and stone and ceiling fragments rained outward in a radius that flattened every tree within 50 feet of the compound's surface. Manda's head snapped upward from the impact. The jaw dislocated, the skull fractured along lines that ran from the point of contact to the back of the beast's brain case. The snake's body went rigid with the neurological shock of a blow that had reached its central nervous system through 3 feet of bone and scale. Then it went limp. The coils stopped moving. The king of serpents, ancient, feared, a creature that had eaten villages and demanded human sacrifices as its summoning fee, collapsed in place, dead, before the echo of the Wrath Hammer's impact faded from the ruined chamber. The green skull that rose from Manda's massive form was proportional to the creature it left. Enormous, blazing emerald, trailing wisps of soul energy that spiraled upward through the hole in the compound ceiling like smoke from a green bonfire. Naruto opened his mouth and the soul consumption activated, and Manda's life force streamed into the Emperor's chest in a river of light that lasted 3 full seconds before the flow completed. The strength of a legendary summon creature joined the reservoir. The green glow around Naruto's armor intensified by a visible degree. Orochimaru watched from across the ruined chamber. His smile was gone. The preparations he had made, the sealed walls, the reinforced architecture, the summoning arrays carved into the floor, lay in rubble around him. His trump card was dead. The creature that had served the snake summoners for generations had been reduced to a corpse in a single swing, and the man who had swung was already turning toward him with the Wrath Hammer still resting on his shoulder, and the skull mask showing nothing except the green fire of absolute certainty. The snake moved. Orochimaru's speed in his new body was genuine, a burst of motion that carried him across the chamber faster than most jonin could track, his hands forming seals in a blur, the jutsu manifesting before the signs were complete. Rashomon gates, 5 of them, the quintuple defense technique, each gate a massive iron barrier carved with demonic faces, erupted from the ground between himself and Naruto. 5 layers of iron, 5 layers of sealed protection that had stopped everything they had ever been asked to stop. Naruto walked through them. The shadow charge reactivated around his body, and he walked forward at the same unhurried pace, and each gate, one after another, 5 times in sequence, burst apart on contact. The iron screamed as it separated. The demonic faces carved into each gate split down their centers as the green force shell passed through them, the way light passes through glass, the material simply ceasing to be an obstacle, becoming debris, becoming wreckage, becoming evidence of a defense that had been tested and found inadequate. 5 gates, 5 explosions of iron fragments, 5 moments of Orochimaru watching his preparations evaporate. The snake tried. He tried with everything his legendary mind had spent 2 years assembling. He tried the 8 branches technique, his body exploding outward into a hydra of white serpents, each head the size of a building, 8 necks extending from a central mass of scale and muscle. Naruto walked through the formation and cut heads with the wrath hammer the way a gardener cuts weeds, each swing severing a neck in a spray of white blood and serpent flesh, each impact carrying the sound of the Emperor's contempt given kinetic expression. The heads fell. They regenerated. They fell again. The cycle repeated until the technique's chakra reserves depleted and the 8 heads collapsed inward, and Orochimaru emerged from the central mass covered in bile and panting. He tried the Kusanagi, the legendary sword, unbreakable by reputation, extending from his mouth on a tongue of muscle aimed at Naruto's throat. The blade hit the Emperor's shield and the green wall of soul energy did what it always did. The Kusanagi's tip pressed against the emerald barrier and stopped. The sword's vibration, the frequency that allowed it to cut through anything, met the soul energy's resonance, and the 2 frequencies collided and the Kusanagi lost. The unbreakable sword cracked. A fissure ran down the blade from its tip to its base, and Orochimaru felt it through the connection to his mouth, and his yellow eyes went wide enough that the slitted pupils became visible in their entirety for the first time. Then Naruto was in front of him. The distance between them, 20 feet of ruined chamber, of broken stone and dead snake coils and shattered iron, ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. Naruto's armored hand closed around Orochimaru's throat the way it had closed around Gado's throat 2 years ago on a bridge in Wave, and the familiarity of the gesture was itself an insult. The same grip, the same contemptuous lift, the same single-armed elevation of a body off the ground, feet kicking, hands scrabbling, the universal posture of something being held at the pleasure of something greater. Orochimaru's hands formed seals even now, even choking, even dying. The genius mind refusing to accept the conclusion that every piece of evidence was presenting. A substitution jutsu began to form. The body replacement technique activated, the escape mechanism that had served him 100 times, the get-out-of-death-free card that his entire survival strategy relied upon. The soul rip interrupted it. Green energy began peeling from Orochimaru's chest in ribbons, visible, tangible, the soul itself being drawn out through flesh and bone, and the elaborate network of body transfer jutsu that the snake had layered over his existence like armor. The substitution failed. The escape route closed. Every contingency Orochimaru had built over decades of paranoid preparation, every backup body, every sealed consciousness fragment, every hidden anchor point he had scattered across the continent, was being pulled inward, consolidated, dragged back to the primary soul by a force that treated the Sanin's elaborate death-cheating infrastructure the way a vacuum treats dust. Orochimaru screamed. The sound echoed through the ruined compound and up through the hole in the ceiling and out into the forest above, and every creature, human and animal, within half a mile of the Sound Village's location heard it and understood on a primal level that something ancient and terrible was ending. Your soul is mine. The green skull that emerged from Orochimaru's body was massive, larger than any single consumption Naruto had performed since the awakening. It blazed with the accumulated knowledge and power and stolen life force of a Sannin who had spent 50 years hoarding everything he could take from the world. The skull contained it all. Every jutsu Orochimaru had learned, every secret he had stolen, every body he had worn and discarded. It trailed ribbons of emerald fire that spiraled around it like rings around a planet. The soul consumption pulled it in. Naruto opened his mouth and the skull streamed into his chest, and the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The green light around his body doubled in intensity. The armor brightened, the skull mask gleaming, the chest plates radiating, the shoulder spikes catching the new light and throwing it across the walls of the ruined compound in dancing patterns. The ground beneath his feet cracked in a circle wider than any previous consumption had produced. His power climbed, visibly, tangibly, the ceiling of his capability, rising to a height that made the previous ceiling look like a step on a staircase that extended beyond sight. He dropped Orochimaru's empty body. It hit the rubble with the sound of something that had stopped mattering before it reached the ground. The Sound Village's remaining occupants, the shinobi who had fled deeper into the compound, the researchers in the lower laboratories, the guards and servants and experiments turned soldiers who had built their lives around serving a master who was now vacant-eyed on the floor of his own throne room, saw the green light rising from the compound's wound like a beacon. They understood. Understanding arrived with the specific speed that survival demands, fast, total, and productive. They left, through emergency exits, through sealed tunnels that led to the forest, through whatever path offered the most distance in the least time. They scattered into the trees and the undergrowth and did not look back. And the Sound Village joined the list of places that used to exist and now existed only as a story about what happens when empires encounter obstacles. Naruto walked out through the hole the Wrath Hammer had made in the ceiling. He rose through the levels of the compound, stepping on rubble, ascending through destroyed floors, climbing through the column of destruction his weapon had carved, until he stood on the surface with the forest around him and the sky above him, and the green light of his body illuminating the trees in a radius that made the surrounding woodland look like it had been transplanted to another world. The Akatsuki's first response arrived 6 weeks later. Kasame Hoshigaki found him on a lake in the land of water. The Shark Man had traveled alone, separated from Itachi, operating on the assumption that a single S-rank fighter of his caliber would be sufficient to retrieve a Jinchuriki, even a Jinchuriki that had destroyed the Sound Village and killed one of the Sannin. The assumption was based on Kasame's understanding of his own power. His understanding of his own power was based on a career spent fighting things and winning. The career was about to reach its conclusion. The lake was vast, a kilometer across, fed by mountain runoff, the water black beneath the overcast sky. Kasame stood on its surface with Samahata strapped to his back and his shark-toothed grin stretching his face into an expression that said he was going to enjoy this. His chakra reserves, the largest of any Akatsuki member, the reserves of a man sometimes called the tailless-tailed beast, saturated the water beneath his feet, and the lake itself responded. The surface began to churn. Waves formed from nothing. The water recognized its master and prepared to become a weapon at his command. Naruto stood on the opposite shore. His armor gleamed in the overcast light. The skull mask was in place. The green fire of his eyes burned across the distance between them. Twin points of emerald that Kasame could see clearly from a kilometer away. And that fact alone should have told the Shark Man everything he needed to know about the scale of what he was approaching. Kasame drew Samahata. The living sword, the chakra-eating blade, the weapon that had drained countless opponents of their energy and fed it to its wielder, unwrapped from its bandages with a sound like a creature stretching after a long sleep. The scales along its surface rippled with anticipation. The mouth at its base, because Samahata had a mouth, because the sword was alive in ways that defied comfortable categorization, grinned in synchronization with its master. He crossed the lake in a burst of water-enhanced speed. The surface beneath his feet erupted with each step, geysers marking his approach like the footsteps of something massive. He closed the distance in 3 seconds, covering a kilometer of open water with the velocity of a predator that has spotted prey, and brought Samahata down in a diagonal slash aimed at separating Naruto's shoulder from his torso. The sword connected with the soul energy field around Naruto's body and began to feed. For 1 second, one single second, Samahata did what Samahata always did. The sword's absorption mechanism engaged. The chakra-eating scales expanded, opening like mouths, drawing in the energy that surrounded the target's body. For 1 second, the sword was pleased. The flow began. Then the flow changed direction. The soul energy did not deplete. The soul energy fed back. The green light poured into Samahada's absorption mechanism, and the mechanism accepted it the way a garden hose accepts the flow from a fire hydrant, with immediate and catastrophic overload. The sword began to vibrate. The vibration started at the scales and traveled inward, reaching the living core of the weapon, the consciousness that made Samahada more than a blade. The vibration became distress. The distress became noise, a high, keening sound that living swords should never produce. The sound of something intelligent experiencing the sensation of being force-fed a substance it was never designed to process. Samahada released Kasame's grip. The sword, loyal for 30 years, bonded to its wielder through decades of combat and mutual feeding, threw itself off its master's hands with the desperate motion of an animal escaping a trap. It hit the water and dove. The splash was enormous and immediate, the sword submerging with the speed of something fleeing for its life, its scales streaming bubbles as it descended into the lake's depths and refused to resurface. Kasame watched his weapon, his partner, his signature, the defining characteristic of his combat identity for 3 decades, abandon him. His grin faded. The shark teeth were still visible, but the confidence behind them had evaporated in the time between one breath and the next. He stood on the water's surface with empty hands and a calculation running behind his eyes that was producing results his ego refused to accept. I grow tired of your distractions. The dual-layered voice hit Kasame's face from 15 feet away, and the water beneath both of them rippled outward from the sound pressure. The contempt in those 6 words was oceanic, deeper than the lake they stood on, wider than the sky above it, carrying the specific weight of a conqueror who had already moved past this moment in his mind and was allowing his body to catch up. The wrath hammer materialized in Naruto's right hand. The sound of its formation rolled across the lake and came back from the far shore, and by the time the echo returned, the swing was already complete. The hammer connected with Kasame's torso at the midpoint of a horizontal arc. The impact produced a sound that the lake would remember in its currents for generations. A boom that flattened the water's surface in a 50-meter radius, that sent a ring wave propagating outward to every shore, that scattered every bird from every tree surrounding the water. Kasame's body achieved a velocity that physics should have refused to authorize. His trajectory carried him across the lake's entire diameter, a kilometer of flight, skipping twice across the surface the way Zabuza had skipped on a smaller body of water 2 years prior, before the far shore's cliff face received him with an impact that carved a crater into the stone deep enough to bury a house inside. The cliff face cracked. Fissures ran upward from the crater, spreading through the stone like frost across a window, and a section of the mountainside above shifted, groaned, and slid downward in a cascade of rock and earth that buried the crater and everything inside it under 100 tons of mountain. Naruto watched from across the lake. The green skull rose from the landslide. It emerged from between the fallen stones, crackling, large, burning with the residual energy of a man who had carried enough chakra to earn comparison to a tailed beast. The skull drifted across the lake's surface toward Naruto, and the soul consumption pulled it home. It entered the Emperor's chest with the familiar sensation of a reservoir growing deeper, and Naruto's power climbed another increment, and the lake settled back to stillness. And somewhere in its depths, Samahada pressed itself against the bottom mud and refused to move. Itachi Uchiha arrived 3 days later. He came without announcement, appearing at the edge of Naruto's camp in the pre-dawn hours, his Akatsuki cloak hanging still in the windless air, his Sharingan already active. The red eyes with their 3-bladed Mangekyo pattern spun behind the shadowed fringe of his hair. He stood at a distance that said he had already measured the threat and chosen to maintain the maximum possible reaction space. He was alone. He would always be alone now, his partner consumed, his organization shrinking, his options narrowing with each report that arrived, bearing news of another member's elimination. He had been sick for years. The disease that was killing him, slowly, steadily, with the patient cruelty of something that wanted him to know it was happening, had eaten away at his reserves and his stamina and left him operating at a fraction of what he had once been. But a fraction of Itachi Uchiha was still Itachi Uchiha. The Mangekyo Sharingan did not care about his lungs. The techniques it granted operated on spiritual energy, on the force of will and the sacrifice of sight, and those resources remained intact even as his body hollowed. He made no speech. He offered no ultimatum. He simply looked at Naruto with those spinning red eyes, and the technique activated. Tsukuyomi, the world inverted. Color became its opposite. The sky turned red. The ground turned black. Naruto found himself standing in a space that existed between the seconds, the Genjutsu dimension, Itachi's personal creation, a world where 72 hours of experience compressed into a single real-world heartbeat. In this space, Itachi was God. In this space, time answered to his will, and pain was whatever he decided it was, and escape required a force of mind that exceeded the technique's creator. The Tsukuyomi constructed its prison around Naruto. Walls formed from nothing, iron spiked, closing inward. The sky pressed down, the ground rose up. The Genjutsu began its work of compression, of suffocation, of the psychological assault that had broken every mind it had ever been aimed at. 2 seconds passed inside the Tsukuyomi. Then the green light ignited. It started at the center of Naruto's chest, the soul of Shao Kahn, 10,000 years of consciousness older than any Genjutsu, more stubborn than any mental prison, more real than any constructed reality, and it expanded outward. The green energy consumed the Tsukuyomi's architecture the way acid consumes cloth. The iron walls melted. The false sky burned away. The compressed time space that Itachi had built over decades of refinement and sacrifice unraveled at its seams as something older and harder than any Sharingan technique pushed outward from inside it and refused to be contained. The Genjutsu shattered. Naruto stood in the real world, the pre-dawn light unchanged, the camp untouched, his armor glowing with the residual emerald of the technique he had just consumed from the inside out. He looked at Itachi with the skull mask giving nothing away and the green eyes saying everything. Itachi's face changed. The composure, legendary, unbreakable, the mask of a man who had killed his own family without letting his expression waver, cracked. The crack was small, a tightening around the eyes, a micro-expression of the lips that lasted a quarter of a second and said volumes about what was happening behind those spinning red irises. The Tsukuyomi had failed. The strongest Genjutsu in the shinobi world had engaged a target, and the target had eaten it alive and walked out wearing the same expression it had walked in with. Itachi's Mangekyo shifted. The left eye changed pattern, the three-bladed design spiraling inward, the chakra behind it building to a crescendo, and the black flames of Amaterasu ignited on Naruto's chest plate. The fire of the sun goddess, the technique that burned everything, that could not be extinguished, that consumed jutsu and matter and concept alike until nothing remained, spread across the Emperor's armor in a wave of black. The heat was immediate and absolute. The air around the contact point distorted. The green-trimmed plates of soul energy armor began to darken at the edges where the flames touched them. 3 seconds. The Amaterasu burned for 3 seconds against the Emperor's form. The longest 3 seconds of the encounter, the only 3 seconds where the outcome existed in a space that could be called uncertain by an observer generous enough to give uncertainty the benefit of the doubt. The Emperor's shield deployed. Green energy wrapped over the armor, rising from within, coating every surface the Amaterasu touched. The soul magic asserting itself against the black flames with the force of something that had survived the destruction of realms and found mere fire. However divine its origin, insufficient cause for concern. The green light met the black flames at their boundary, and the two forces pressed against each other for one additional heartbeat before the soul energy expanded and the Amaterasu contracted, and the black flames, inextinguishable, unstoppable, the pinnacle of fire release in every record the shinobi world maintained, went out, gone. Every tongue of black fire extinguished simultaneously. The armor beneath glowed green and intact, the surface unmarked, the Emperor's shield still radiating outward in a corona that said, "Next." Itachi's remaining eye bled. The Mangekyo Sharingan demanded payment for every technique it produced, and the payment was sight, and Itachi had been paying this toll for years. His vision was failing, his body was failing, his disease was consuming him from within. And the enemy he faced was beyond everything he had remaining to give. The Susanoo rose. the full manifestation, the final technique, the last resort, the perfect armor of the Mangekyo's power given maximum expression. It built itself around Itachi in layers, skeletal ribcage first, then muscle, then armor, then completion. The ethereal giant stood 40 feet tall, burning with an orange-gold radiance, the Totsuka blade extended in one hand, the sealing sword, the weapon that banished anything it cut into an eternal genjutsu dream. The Yata mirror occupied the other hand, the shield that reflected all attacks, all elements, all forms of damage, regardless of their nature. The Susanoo was Itachi's absolute limit. The technique represented everything he had left, every reserve of chakra, every ounce of spiritual energy, every year of life he would never live compressed into a single manifestation of power. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the pinnacle of Uchiha power expressed through the body of the most gifted Uchiha who had ever lived. Naruto looked at it the way an emperor looks at a castle that has chosen the wrong side of a war. The Nine Tails chakra enhancement activated. Kurama's red energy rose from behind the seal, spiraling upward through Naruto's body in ribbons of vermilion fire, the heat of it visible in the air as distortion waves. It met the green soul energy at his core, and the two forces braided together in the double helix that preceded maximum output. Red and green spiraling around each other, mixing at their boundaries into the gold-tinged third energy that had no name. The fusion power of a tailed beast and an interdimensional conqueror given combined expression. The ground beneath Naruto's feet shattered to bedrock. The pressure wave of the enhancement's activation flattened every tree in a 20-meter radius, their trunks bending away from him like grass in a hurricane before snapping at their bases and falling outward in a perfect circle of destruction. The hum of his combined power reached a pitch that made teeth vibrate in their sockets and set the air itself trembling in visible distortion. He summoned the Wrath Hammer. It formed at maximum output, fed by Kurama's chakra, amplified by the consumed souls of Orochimaru and Kasame and Manda and every other soul that had entered the reservoir over 2 years of conquest. The head of the weapon was enormous. The emerald lightning that arced across its surface was threaded with red. Kurama's influence visible in the weapon's makeup, the combined power of the hammer's construction greater than any previous manifestation by an order of magnitude. He swung. The Wrath Hammer connected with the Susanoo's chest at the full force of the Nine Tails enhancement. The sound, the crack of impact, was a seismic event. It propagated through the ground beneath them and registered on detection arrays in 3 separate villages. The shockwave flattened the camp behind Naruto and continued outward, stripping topsoil from the earth in a ring that extended 100 meters in every direction. The Susanoo's ribcage cracked. The perfect armor, the technique the shinobi world had spent generations establishing as invincible, split along the impact point. Fracture lines radiated outward from the center of the hit, spreading across the ethereal construct's chest like cracks in a frozen lake. The orange-gold glow flickered. The Susanoo's form wavered. The Totsuka blade swung in response. Itachi's counterattack, the sealing sword arcing toward Naruto from the right, its ethereal edge trailing the dimensional energy of the prison it contained. The blade was aimed at center mass. Anything it touched would be sealed forever in an unending dream. Naruto's left hand intercepted it. His armored fingers closed around the Totsuka blade's edge, and the sealing jutsu built into the weapon engaged. It reached for his soul. It found the Emperor's consciousness. It attempted to draw him into the dreaming prison. And what it found on the other side of that attempt was a mind that had consumed civilizations, a soul that had swallowed worlds, a consciousness so vast and so ancient and so filled with the accumulated essence of thousands of other souls that the Totsuka blade's sealing dimension was, by comparison, a closet trying to contain an ocean. The seal reversed. The feedback hit the blade in a surge of green energy that traveled up its length from edge to hilt. The Totsuka blade vibrated, the frequency climbing, the ethereal material of its construction reaching a resonance point that exceeded its structural capacity. The blade shattered. The sealing sword, legendary, unique, a weapon that had been feared since the founding of the shinobi system, broke into fragments of fading light that dispersed into the morning air and vanished. Right what Itachi's face did when the Totsuka blade broke in someone's hand. The composure did more than crack. It fell. The mask of the prodigy, the expression of serene detachment that Itachi had maintained through the massacre of his clan, through years of exile, through every horror and sacrifice his life had demanded of him, came apart. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened slightly. The Mangekyo Sharingan spun faster. An involuntary response, the visual system trying to process information that contradicted every framework it operated within. He looked old in that moment. He looked like what he was. A young man who had been dying for years and had just watched his final defense become irrelevant. The Susanoo collapsed. Without the Totsuka blade, without the Yada mirror that had fractured in the same feedback surge, the construct lost its anchoring components. The armor fell away in sections, the ethereal plates dissolving, the ribcage following, the skeleton beneath it crumbling, until Itachi stood alone, unprotected, a frail man in a black cloak with bleeding eyes and blood at the corners of his mouth, and the terrible understanding that he was standing in front of something he could never have defeated even at his peak, even at full health, even with 100 years of preparation. Naruto gave him 3 seconds. 3 seconds of silence in which the Emperor allowed the legendary Itachi Uchiha to understand what had happened, to process the failure, to feel the full weight of the gap between what he was and what stood before him. It was a generosity of a particular kind, the generosity of a conqueror who recognizes a worthy opponent and grants them the dignity of comprehension before the end. Itachi straightened his spine. He met the green eyes behind the skull mask with his own bleeding red. He did not run. He did not beg. He did not attempt another technique. He simply stood and accepted what was coming with the same quiet resolve, the same steady presence that had defined every choice he had ever made, even here, even now, even facing a death that went beyond death. The soul rip activated. Green energy peeled from Itachi's chest in a ribbon of emerald light. The technique began its work, drawing the soul outward, separating essence from vessel, pulling the sum total of Itachi Uchiha's existence from the body that had carried it through 21 years of sacrifice and pain and service. Itachi's eyes widened further. The pain of the soul rip registered across his features, a pain that existed beyond physical nerve endings, a pain that reached into the metaphysical substrate of self and made its separation felt in every layer of being. "Your soul is mine!" The skull emerged. Itachi's soul, luminescent, enormous, trailing the specific energy signature of a visual ability that had been legendary since before its wielder had finished growing, rose from his collapsing body in a blaze of emerald light threaded with red. The Mangekyo's power was visible in the skull's composition, the 3-bladed pattern flickering within the green, the Sharingan's legacy contained within the consumed essence, carried into the Emperor's reservoir as one more absorbed capability in a collection that grew deeper with every significant death. The soul consumption pulled the skull inward. It entered Naruto's chest, and the effect was immediate. The green light changing texture for a moment, the Sharingan's red swirling through the emerald like blood through water, mixing, being digested, the Emperor's soul incorporating the visual legacy into its own vast architecture, before the green returned to its pure state, brighter than before, denser than before, the floor of Naruto's power having risen again by an increment that the world would feel. Itachi's body fell. It hit the ground with the weight of a life that had been spent entirely in service to something, first to his village, then to his mission, then to his brother's future. In the end, it had been spent in service to the Emperor's growth. The distinction was academic to the dead. The Akatsuki's losses accelerated after Itachi and Kasame. The remaining members, those who had yet to encounter the Emperor, received the intelligence through their network and made their calculations. Deidara's explosions, Sasori's puppets, Kakuzu's hearts, Hidan's immortality, techniques that had made them each legendary in their own right, that had sustained their status as S-rank threats for years or decades. Each met the Emperor's arsenal in encounters that lasted minutes and ended with green skulls rising into the air. The organization's mastermind, the one who called himself Pain, who styled himself a god, who believed the Rinnegan made him the arbiter of the world's fate, decided that the time for individual engagements had passed. Nagato sent all 6 paths. The assault hit a town in the northern territories that had submitted to Naruto's empire 3 months prior. A civilian settlement of 12,000 people who had accepted the emperor's authority and received his protection in exchange. The Pain Assault was a message. It was meant to demonstrate that the emperor's protection was insufficient, that the empire was vulnerable at its edges, that the god of the Rinnegan could strike where he wished and withdraw before consequences arrived. The consequences did not need to arrive. The consequences were already there. Naruto felt the assault begin through the soul energy network he had laid through his territories, a web of awareness that connected him to every colony, every settlement, every piece of ground his power had claimed. The disruption registered like a pulse of interference, and he moved toward it with a speed that made the intervening distance irrelevant. He arrived as the Deva path was lifting the town's central district into the air. The gravity manipulation technique, Shinra Tensei at massive scale, the repulsive force turning buildings into projectiles and civilians into casualties, was mid-execution. Half the commercial district was already airborne, rotating in the gravitational field, the structures breaking apart at their structural limits as the force exceeded their design tolerances. Naruto hit the ground at the town's perimeter, and the impact of his landing sent a shockwave through the earth that made the Deva Path's gravitational attack stutter. The soul consumption energy that radiated from his body reached outward in tendrils, sensing, searching, finding the chakra signatures of 6 bodies operating from a single remote source. He counted them. He located them. He established their positions the way a general establishes enemy positions on a battlefield, completely, accurately, and with immediate tactical intent. The animal path came first. It had summoned creatures, a rhinoceros the size of a building, a multi-headed dog that regenerated when struck, a bird that filled the sky with its wingspan. The summons converged on Naruto's position from 3 directions simultaneously, each one a weapon of enormous physical force aimed at a single target. The Wrath Hammer answered all 3. Naruto swung in a full rotation, the weapon's arc describing a complete circle around his body, the green burning head of it connecting with each summoned creature in sequence. The rhinoceros caught the hammer at the apex of the arc, and its skull compressed inward, its body folding around the impact point before the kinetic transfer launched it backward through 2 buildings that ceased to exist on contact. The multi-headed dog caught the hammer on the return arc, and every head separated from every neck simultaneously, the regeneration failing because there was nothing left to regenerate from. The soul energy in the Wrath Hammer's impact, converting biological matter to energy, scatter at the cellular level. The bird caught the hammer on the upswing, and its wingspan, 100 feet of feathered summoned creature, folded like paper as the impact drove it into the ground, hard enough to leave an impression of its form in the earth. The animal path attempted to resummon. Naruto closed the distance before the hand seals completed and drove the Wrath Hammer into the path's chest. The body, Nagato's puppet, the corpse animated by chakra rods, cratered, the torso compressed. The chakra rods that connected it to its master shattered. A green skull did not rise. The paths had no souls of their own. They were vessels, puppets, bodies borrowed from the dead and animated by Nagato's will. They fell and stayed empty. The human path approached from behind. Its technique, the soul-stealing ability, the power to rip the consciousness from a living body through physical contact, required proximity. It reached for Naruto. Its hand touched the Emperor's back, pressing flat between the shoulder blades, and the soul extraction jutsu activated. It found the Emperor's reservoir. The human path's technique was designed to reach to a body, locate the soul, and pull it free. It was elegant, and it was absolute, and it never failed because it operated on a principle that was fundamental to the metaphysics of the shinobi world. Souls existed in bodies, and forces strong enough could separate them. The technique reached into Naruto and found a soul. It found 10,000 souls. It found the Emperor's consciousness, and behind it the accumulated essence of every being. Naruto had consumed since the age of 8, warriors and criminals and legendary shinobi and summon creatures and a Sannin, all of them compressed into a reservoir so vast and so dense that the human path's extraction technique was a teaspoon trying to empty an ocean. The feedback was instant, the soul vacuum reversed. The Emperor's reservoir, a space that consumed rather than released, that pulled rather than pushed, that existed in a state of perpetual hunger, grabbed the human path's extraction technique and followed it back to its source. The chakra rods in the human path's body glowed green. The puppet's arm, still pressed against Naruto's back, began to disintegrate, the fingers converting to energy scatter first, then the hand, then the wrist, the dissolution traveling up the arm toward the shoulder as the Emperor's power ate the connection point alive. The human path tried to withdraw. The arm would not release. The soul vacuum had locked onto the connection and was pulling, drawing energy and matter and the animating force of Nagato's will through the contact point, consuming the path from the outside in. The puppet jerked backward with the desperate motion of something trying to tear itself free of a trap. The arm separated at the elbow, torn loose by the path's own retreat, the severed portion dissolving into green energy on contact with Naruto's back, absorbed, consumed, added to the reservoir. The human path staggered away, one arm gone, the remaining body losing cohesion as the feedback damage spread through its chakra network. It collapsed 6 steps from where it started and did not rise. The Deva path engaged directly. Shinra Tensei, the almighty push, gravity itself weaponized, a force that had destroyed villages and ended wars. The invisible wall of repulsive energy launched at Naruto from 40 feet away, enough force to flatten a city block, to send buildings and bodies and earth flying outward from its source in a sphere of destruction. The Emperor's shield materialized. The green wall of soul energy appeared between Naruto and the gravitational technique at the moment of contact. The Shinra Tensei hit it. The force, enormous, planetary, the gravity manipulation of someone who believed themselves a god, pressed against the Emperor's shield, and the shield held. The green surface dimpled inward, a concavity forming at the impact point, the shield bending under the gravitational pressure without breaking. The Deva path increased output. The air screamed. The ground beneath Naruto's feet cracked in a circle as the redirected force bled downward through the shield's base. The Emperor's shield did not break, it absorbed. The green light brightened at the impact point, the soul energy consuming the gravitational technique the way it consumed all things directed at it, and the Shinra Tensei's power disappeared into the barrier and was gone. Converted, added to the shield's energy reserves. The gravitational force that could flatten villages fed the Emperor's defense and made it stronger rather than weaker. The Deva Path's 5-second recharge window opened. Naruto did not waste it. He moved through the remaining paths in 7 seconds. The Hungry Ghost Path, the chakra absorption puppet, opened its barrier, and Naruto walked through it the same way soul energy walked through every barrier in this world. By being something, barriers were never designed to interact with. The Wrath Hammer ended the Hungry Ghost Path mid-absorption. The Hell Path, the weapons puppet, its head splitting to reveal the mechanical arsenal stored within, launched 6 missiles that the Emperor's shield absorbed without producing smoke. The Wrath Hammer ended the Hell Path before the 7th missile loaded. The Naraka Path attempted to summon the Outer Path, the King of Hell, the Regeneration Statue, the mechanism by which destroyed paths were restored. The summoning circle completed. The ground began to open. Naruto drove the Wrath Hammer into the summoning circle. The impact interrupted the technique at its foundation, the soul energy of the weapon's construction disrupting the summoning array, the emerald lightning arcing through the carved seal work and burning it from the inside out. The King of Hell, half emerged, its massive demonic face visible above the broken ground, screamed as the summoning reversed. It retreated back into whatever dimension housed it, and the Naraka path stood alone and unsupported and lasted exactly one more swing of the hammer before it joined the others. The Deva path remained, the primary body, the one that carried the strongest connection to Nagato, the one that wore the face of Yahiko, the friend whose death had started everything, stood alone in the wreckage of the northern town, with its 5 counterparts destroyed around it, and its Rinnegan spinning with the input of everything it had just witnessed. It performed Chibaku Tensei, the final technique, the gravity technique that created moons, that compressed earth and matter into a sphere in the sky, that was said to be the technique that originally created the moon above the elemental nations. A point of gravitational singularity launched upward from the Deva Path's palm, and the world began to tear. The ground lifted. Buildings tore from their foundations. Trees ripped from the earth, their roots trailing soil. The gravitational pull aimed skyward, collecting mass from a radius of 100 meters, building the sphere. Larger and larger, darker and darker, a growing planetoid of compressed stone and earth and everything it had grabbed from the town below. Naruto stood at the edge of the pull radius. The gravitational force tugged at his armor, at his body, upward, insistent. He leaned into it, the way a man leans into a strong wind, and the green energy around his boots anchored him to the ground with a force that exceeded the Chibaku Tensei's pull. He summoned the Wrath Hammer at Nine Tails Enhancement. The red and green spiraled. The gold-tinged third energy built. The weapon formed at maximum output, the hammerhead blazing with combined force that made the gravitational sphere above look small by comparison to the energy concentrated in a single weapon. He threw it. The Wrath Hammer left his hand with the force of a siege weapon, designed by something that considered sieges a form of conversation. It rose toward the Chibaku Tensei sphere, upward, through the gravitational pull, accelerating rather than decelerating, because the soul energy propelling it exceeded any gravitational force the Rinnegan could generate. The hammer hit the sphere at its center. The explosion was white. For a full second, the sky above the northern town went white. Every frequency of light emitted simultaneously as the Wrath Hammer's stored energy released against the compressed mass of the Chibaku Tensei. The sphere disintegrated. Fragments the size of houses erupted outward in every direction, the compressed mass returning to individual components with extreme violence, scattering across a kilometer of sky before gravity reasserted itself and the rain of debris began. Naruto raised the Emperor's shield above the town, a dome of green energy that caught the falling debris and dissolved each piece on contact. Stone and earth and tree fragments hit the emerald barrier and converted to energy scatter, protecting the town below from the consequences of the technique's destruction. The Deva Path stood in the wreckage below. Its Chibaku Tensei was gone. Its 5 counterpart paths were gone. Its arsenal was empty. It looked at Naruto with the Rinnegan eyes that connected it to Nagato. Wherever Nagato was, whatever hidden location housed his frail body and his machine of chakra rods. And those eyes carried the first expression the Deva Path had ever worn that resembled acceptance. Naruto descended. He walked toward the Deva Path with the Wrath Hammer reconstituted in his hand. The weapon had returned after the throw, rematerializing in his grip, because soul energy constructs answered to the Emperor's will rather than the laws of physics. He stood before the puppet that wore Yahiko's face and looked into the Rinnegan with the green fire of eyes that had seen everything these legendary circles could produce and remained unimpressed. Where is your true body? The question was a statement wearing a question's clothes. Naruto already knew. The soul energy network that connected him to his territories had sensed the chakra rod transmissions since the paths first arrived. The direction of the signal, the approximate distance, the location of the man behind the puppets was information Naruto had possessed since the assault began. The question was theater. One final chance for the god of the Rinnegan to come out of hiding on his own terms, rather than be dug out like a rodent from a burrow. The Deva Path pointed. Naruto left the town. He traveled northwest for 40 minutes at a speed that turned the forest into a blur of green and brown. He found the hidden temple, a structure built into a mountainside, concealed by paper and by Konan's surveillance, a place designed to house the real Nagato in a state of permanent connection to his paths and permanent isolation from the world that might threaten his damaged body. He walked in. The paper that formed Konan's defensive perimeter parted for him. Whether by her choice or by the soul energy's disruption of the technique's structure was unclear and irrelevant. The corridor beyond was dim, lit by the faint glow of chakra-reactive seals. At its end, in a chamber that smelled of incense and antiseptic, Nagato sat in his mechanical chair with the chakra rods protruding from his back and his emaciated body visible beneath the robes of a man who had stopped pretending to be anything other than what he was. Conan stood beside him. Her paper wings were spread, a trillion sheets of paper folded into the shape of a guardian angel, explosive tags embedded throughout, the technique she had spent her entire adult life refining for exactly this scenario. She was going to fight. The resolution in her eyes said she knew the outcome and had chosen to stand regardless. Nagato looked up. The Rinnegan, the legendary eyes, the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths, the visual jutsu that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of human potential, stared at Naruto from within a face that had been eaten alive by its own ambition. He was skeletal. He was barely alive. The chair and the rods and the machines that sustained him were more of his existence than his body was. He spoke. He delivered his philosophy, the cycle of hatred, the nature of pain, the belief that only through suffering could understanding arise, that only through mutual destruction could peace emerge. He had earned the words. He had paid for them in flesh and blood and the bodies of everyone he had loved and lost. His voice carried the weight of genuine conviction. A man who believed what he said because he had carved the proof of it into his own bones. Naruto listened. He let the speech complete. He stood in the temple with the skull mask reflecting the dim light and the green eyes burning and the wrath hammer resting on his shoulder, and he let a man who called himself a god deliver his testament to an audience of one. The silence that followed the speech filled the chamber. You will never win. The dual-layered voice hit the temple walls, and the paper that formed them rustled in the resonance. The words were final in the way all the Emperor's words were final, carrying the weight of absolute authority and the force of a 10,000-year perspective that had seen every variant of Nagato's philosophy tried and failed across 100 different worlds. Peace through pain. Peace through fear. Peace through mutual destruction. Every iteration, in every realm Shao Kahn had conquered, had produced the same result. A population broken enough to be ruled and a ruler too damaged to rule them. The cycle broke when someone strong enough to end it arrived. The someone was here. The soul rip engaged from across the room. The green energy leaped from Naruto's extended hand, crossing the distance to Nagato's chair in the time between breaths, wrapping around the emaciated body, beginning the extraction. Nagato's back arched. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair with whatever strength his atrophied muscles could still produce. His mouth opened, and the sound that emerged was less a scream and more a frequency, the vibration of a legendary soul being separated from a body that had held it at the cost of everything else. The chakra rods overloaded. The mechanical systems that sustained Nagato's life sparked and smoked as the soul energy interfered with their operation. The temple shook. The walls, paper and stone alike, trembled as the power of the Rinnegan's holder was drawn out of its shell. Your soul is mine. Nagato's skull rose. The green light of it filled the temple to its ceiling, blazing, enormous, trailing the specific energy of the Rinnegan itself, the sage's legacy, visible as patterns within the emerald. The skull carried more power than any previous consumption except Orochimaru's, the raw chakra of someone who had been touched by the divine, who had wielded eyes that were supposed to belong to gods, who had bent reality through force of will and visual jutsu that predated the shinobi system itself. The soul consumption drew it in. The skull entered Naruto's chest and the effect was transformative. The power surge that followed made the Orochimaru consumption look moderate. The green light expanding outward in a pulse that blew the temple's paper walls outward in a million fluttering sheets, that cracked the mountain stone around the chamber, that sent a column of emeralds skyward through the ceiling, hard enough to part the clouds above. The Rinnegan's echo joined the reservoir. The sage's power joined the emperor's collection. The floor rose again. Conan surrounded him before the surge completed. 1 billion sheets of paper, every one of them an explosive tag, 10 billion explosive notes compressed into a formation designed to destroy a god. The paper wrapped around Naruto's body in a sphere of layered death, each sheet pressing against the next. The total explosive yield sufficient to leave a crater where a mountain currently stood. Conan stood outside the sphere, with her hands pressed together in the resolve of a woman who had watched her last friend die and decided that the only response remaining was to take his killer with her. The explosion was magnificent. The detonation consumed the temple, the mountain, and 3 acres of forest in a ball of fire that the nearest village saw as a second sunrise on the northern horizon. The sound reached them 4 seconds later, a rolling thunder that went on for 10 full seconds before subsiding. The heat flash scorched trees a kilometer from the epicenter. The crater that remained was 100 meters across and deep enough that groundwater was already pooling at its bottom. Naruto walked out of the smoke. The armor glowed green. The skull mask was intact. The shoulder spikes radiated soul energy in waves that dispersed the remaining smoke around his body. He was undamaged. The Emperor's shield had deployed at the moment of detonation, the green barrier absorbing the explosive force, consuming it, converting 10 billion explosive tags worth of destructive energy into additional fuel for the very defense that protected against it. The shield had grown stronger during the explosion rather than weaker. The logic of this was the logic of fighting something that existed outside the system your weapons were built within. Every attack fed it, every assault strengthened it, every escalation widened the gap. Conan stood at the crater's edge. Her paper was gone. Every sheet spent, every tag detonated, her decade of preparation expended in a single moment. She was alone. She was unarmed. She was looking at the figure emerging from the smoke of her greatest technique with the expression of a woman watching mathematics prove her wrong about something she had believed with every fiber of her being. Her hands lowered to her sides. The fight left her body the way air leaves a punctured vessel, completely, immediately, with the finality of something that is never coming back. Your soul is mine. The soul rip crossed the crater. Conan's skull, smaller, blue-tinged, beautiful in the way all her techniques had been beautiful, rose and traveled the distance to the Emperor's chest. The blue paper that had always surrounded her drifted downward around her empty body like snow in a temple garden. She fell among her pages. Naruto turned from the crater and walked south. The Akatsuki's active membership was approaching 0. The intelligence network confirmed what the soul consumption reservoir already told him. The named threats were diminishing. What remained was the architecture, the man behind the curtain, the masked figure who had been pulling strings since before the organization's founding, the one who had set the Tailed Beast collection in motion, for reasons that extended beyond anything the rank-and-file members had been told. Tuba came to him. The masked man appeared at the edge of Naruto's camp on a morning when the air was still and the light was gray, and the forest around the encampment held its breath the way all living things showed their breath, when something with a single sharing an eye behind, an orange spiral mask materializes from a dimensional tear in the fabric of space. He arrived with theater. He arrived with the performance of casualness that had characterized his public-facing persona for years, the foolish voice, the exaggerated gestures, the act of being less than he was. Then the act dropped. The voice changed. The posture straightened. The single Mangekyo Sharingan behind the mask's eye hole spun with the pattern of a man who had given up pretending and decided that honesty was a more efficient use of his remaining time. "I want to explain to you what I'm trying to accomplish," he said. The voice was low and carrying. The Sharingan's pattern was Obito Uchiha's pattern, the man who died at Kanabi Bridge, the teammate Kakashi mourned, the boy who gave his eye and his life for his friends and then didn't die, and spent the decades since building something terrible in the shape of his grief. He explained the infinite Tsukuyomi. He explained it with the specificity of a man who had spent 20 years constructing the architecture of a worldwide genjutsu, and wanted someone to understand the elegance of the engineering before it consumed them. A world where everyone got what they wanted. A world where loss was undone. A world where Rin was alive and the war had never happened, and everyone existed in a dream so perfect that waking from it would be an act of cruelty rather than liberation. Naruto listened. He listened the way a king listens to a petitioner, explaining why their field should be exempted from the harvest tax, with the half attention of someone whose decision preceded the speech and will outlast it. The skull mask gave nothing away. The green eyes behind it burned at their standard luminosity. The wrath hammer rested on his shoulder with the weight of a final verdict that had already been written and was waiting to be delivered. Obito finished his explanation. He waited for a response. The response was a silence so long and so complete that the forest birds, which had stopped singing when Obito arrived, began to wonder if it was safe to start again. Then Naruto stepped forward. No words. No counter-philosophy. No debate about the nature of reality or the ethics of forced dreaming, or the question of whether a world built from illusion was worth the destruction of the one built from truth. The Emperor did not debate. The Emperor did not engage with the philosophical foundations of his enemy's motivations. The Emperor conquered. Everything else was commentary. The wrath hammer swung. It passed through Obito's body. The Kamui, the dimension-cutting technique, the phasing ability that made the masked man's body intangible, that allowed physical matter to pass through him as though he existed in a different layer of reality, activated at the moment of the swing. The hammer moved through the space Obito's body occupied and connected with nothing. The air behind him cratered from the force of the displaced swing, a pressure wave that flattened trees 30 feet away. But Obito himself stood untouched, his body a ghost, the Kamui's dimensional shift holding him in the space between physical and immaterial. The mask's eye hole showed the Sharingan's satisfaction. The smirk was audible in his voice when he spoke. My technique makes me untouchable. Physical attacks. Naruto swung again. The second swing was different. The wrath hammer's head blazed with a light that exceeded its standard emerald, the green deepening, darkening, becoming the specific hue of the soul consumption technique concentrated into a weapon's striking surface. The soul-seeking energy, the power that found spirits regardless of their physical container's location. The technique that reached across dimensional boundaries because souls existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Wrapped the hammer in a field of spiritual magnetism that did not require physical contact to function. The hammer passed through Obito's phasing body. The soul energy did not pass through. It caught. The green field snagged on Obito's soul the way a fishhook snags on flesh. The dimensional shift protecting his body, but leaving his spirit exactly where it had always been, occupying the same spiritual coordinate regardless of his physical displacement. The soul energy locked on. It pulled. The sensation hit Obito mid-phase, a sudden, wrenching force at the center of his being, a pressure on something that had never been pressured before. The experience of his own metaphysical essence being grabbed by something that existed outside the dimensional framework Kamui operated within. Obito solidified. The Kamui deactivated, an involuntary response, the technique failing, as the soul being targeted required the body to be present. The dimensional shift collapsing because maintaining it required spiritual coherence, and his spiritual coherence was being disrupted at its foundation. He became tangible. He became real. He became something the wrath hammer could touch. The realization hit his visible eye at the same moment the soul rip fully engaged. The green energy peeled outward from his chest, visible, tangible, the ribbon of emerald light drawing his soul from his body through dimensional barriers that had previously made the extraction impossible. The Kamui eye spun, trying to phase, trying to escape, trying to shift back into the untouchable dimension, and failing, because the soul energy had already anchored itself and the anchor held regardless of what the body did. Obito screamed. The sound came through the mask, muffled by the spiral pattern, distorted by the echo inside the hollow space, and it carried the particular frequency of a man experiencing something he had genuinely believed was impossible. His hand reached for the mask. His fingers scrabbled at the edge of it, pulling it free, the face beneath becoming visible for the first time. Scarred, half reconstructed with Hashirama's cells, the face of a young man who had suffered enough to break and had chosen to break the world rather than himself. Your soul is mine. The skull rose. Obito's soul, carrying the weight of a Mangekyo Sharingan, of Hashirama's cells, of decades of planning and grief, and the love for a dead girl that had motivated the potential destruction of reality, emerged from his body in a blaze of green. It hovered for half a heartbeat, a moment of recognition, a moment where the soul existed between its former vessel and its new home, a moment where everything Obito Uchiha had been and wanted and believed existed in pure visible form. Then the soul consumption took it. The mask hit the ground at the same time as the body. The spiral pattern stared up at the gray sky with its single eye hole and nothing behind it. The plan for the infinite Tsukuyomi died with its architect. The strings that had been pulling the Akatsuki since its founding were severed at their source. The last manipulator was gone, and the map of remaining threats had shrunk to a single entry. The legend, the specter, the name that had haunted the elemental nations since before the village system existed. Madara Uchiha came out of the mountains on a morning when the sky was the color of a bruise, and the wind carried the specific electricity of something catastrophic about to announce itself. He had been dead. He should have remained dead. The mechanisms that brought him back were layered and complex. Hashirama's cells preserving his body past its natural expiration, the Rebirth technique channeled through methods he had established decades in advance, the sheer force of will that made death a temporary condition for someone too stubborn to accept it and too powerful to be held by it. He returned to a world that had spent generations being afraid of his memory, and he found a world that now had something else to be afraid of, and this offended him. He emerged from the mountain range that bordered the land of Earth, his body restored, his power returned, his eyes carrying both the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan and the Rinnegan in a combination that had never existed before or since. His armor was ancient, the red plates of a warrior from an era that predated the village system, styled after a time when shinobi fought in open war rather than from shadows. His hair fell to his waist. His posture carried the weight of absolute certainty, the certainty of someone who had been the strongest person alive in their time and saw no reason why the current time should differ. The perfect Susanoo manifested around him as he descended from the mountains. The ethereal giant built itself in stages: skeleton, muscle, armor, completion, until it stood at its full height. The height was beyond buildings, beyond towers. The perfect Susanoo's form cast a shadow that covered the valley below like a second nightfall, its sword drawn, its wings spread, its scale sufficient to challenge anything the current era had produced. He walked southward. The perfect Susanoo walked with him, each step of the ethereal giant crossing a distance that would take a normal person minutes to cover. Mountains passed, forests passed. The landscape beneath his feet changed from highland stone to lowland forest as he moved toward the territory the emperor had claimed. He came because someone had to come. He came because the world he had once dominated was being dominated by something else. And his pride, legendary, absolute, the defining characteristic of the man who had challenged Hashirama Senju and fought him to a standstill, refused to exist in a world where something stood above him. He found Naruto on a plain. The plain stretched between two mountain ranges, a flat expanse of grassland that had been farmland once and would be something else after today. The wind moved through the grass in waves. The sky remained bruised and heavy, clouds pressing low, the atmospheric pressure dropping as two sources of power existed in proximity, and the weather itself tried to decide which one to flee from. Naruto stood at the center of the plain. He had known Madara was coming. The soul energy network carried the disruption of the Susanoo's passage through his territory, and the specific signature of a revived legend was difficult to mistake for anything else. He had chosen this plain because it was flat and it was empty, and what was about to happen needed space. He was already armored. The skull mask was already in place. The green fire of his eyes burned through the sockets across the plain's entire width toward the approaching Colossus. Madara's voice reached him from inside the Susanoo's chest cavity, projected outward through the ethereal armor, amplified by the technique's resonance, carrying across the plain with the weight of a man who had never needed to shout to be heard. You have taken what belongs to this world and claimed it for yourself. You are an aberration, an anomaly, something from outside the natural order that has been allowed to persist because those who should have stopped you lack the will. I do not lack the will. The perfect Susanoo raised its blade, the ethereal weapon, longer than a city block, burning with the combined energy of the Mangekyo and the Rinnegan, capable of cutting through mountain ranges with a single swing, rose above the plane and caught what little light pierced the heavy clouds. Naruto watched it rise. His response carried across the plane in the dual-layered voice that made the grass itself lean away from its source. "You are the strongest this world ever produced. I will give you the death your legend deserves. Then I will take your soul as I have taken everything else." Madara's limbo technique activated first. The invisible clones, operating in a dimension adjacent to the physical world, undetectable by any sense the shinobi world possessed, striking with the full force of Madara's physical capability from angles that could not be perceived, launched from 4 directions. 4 impacts hit Naruto simultaneously. The force of Madara's full strength, multiplied by 4, arriving from 4 vectors, each hit carrying enough power to crater stone, connected with the Emperor's body from every side. Naruto rocked from the impacts. His boots dragged through the earth, 4 furrows carved in the grass as the force of 4 simultaneous strikes pushed him backward. The hits landed. They were real. They carried genuine force. For the first time in the fight, the evidence of damage was visible. The armor dented at 4 contact points, the soul energy flaring at each impact site as the defense absorbed what it could and distributed the rest. Then the Emperor's shield expanded in all directions simultaneously. The green barrier erupted outward in a sphere, a dome of soul energy expanding from Naruto's body at the speed of will, filling the dimensional space the limbo clones occupied. The soul energy made the invisible visible. The limbo shadows, 4 of them, each wearing Madara's form in the adjacent dimension, became outlined in green. Their forms solidified against the emerald light like silhouettes against a bonfire. Visible, targetable, vulnerable, Naruto destroyed all 4 in a single rotation of the Wrath Hammer. The weapon swept through the dimensional gap the soul energy had bridged, connecting with each limbo clone in sequence, and the clones, deprived of their invisibility and their dimensional protection, shattered on contact. 4 impacts, 4 detonations of dispersing shadow matter, 4 copies of the world's strongest legend erased in a single circular swing. Madara's expression, visible inside the Susanu's chest cavity, shifted. A tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the Rinnegan eyes. The limbo technique had been his opening gambit, a technique designed to end fights before they began by attacking from a dimension the opponent couldn't perceive. It had been countered in 8 seconds. The truth-seeking balls deployed, 5 of them, black spheres of malleable void energy that negated jutsu and matter alike, that reduced everything they touched to its base components, that represented the pinnacle of sage-level techniques inherited from the distant past. They launched from behind Madara's Susanoo like dark comets, each one aimed at Naruto, each one carrying enough destructive potential to erase the space it occupied from the physical record. Naruto raised the Wrath Hammer and met the first truth-seeking ball with the face of the weapon. The collision produced a sound that belonged in the vocabulary of creation stories rather than combat. The Wrath Hammer, soul energy forged into matter by a conqueror's will, met the truth-seeking ball, void energy that unmade matter at the fundamental level, and the 2 forces hit equilibrium. The contact point between them blazed white. The grass beneath them disintegrated in a 30-foot radius, not burned, not cut, simply ceasing to exist as the competing energies made their disagreement physical. The ground beneath the vanished grass followed, topsoil, then clay, then stone, all of it unmade in an expanding crater as the collision's byproducts radiated downward. The Wrath Hammer held. The truth-seeking ball. Unable to negate something that operated outside the jutsu system, it was designed to counter. Pressed against the weapon's face and was repelled. It flew backward, deformed, its perfect spherical shape distorted into an oval by the force of the rejection. The remaining 4 adjusted trajectory, arcing, circling, attempting to find an angle the Emperor's weapon could not cover. Naruto swatted them from the air in 4 successive swings. Each truth-seeking ball met the Wrath Hammer, and each meeting produced the same white flash collision, the same expansion of nothingness beneath, the same ultimate rejection. 5 black spheres, sage-level techniques of the highest order, lay scattered across the plane in deformed shapes, their offensive capability neutralized by repeated contact with something that refused to be unmade. The perfect Susanoo descended. Madara brought the Colossus forward. The full weight of it, the full speed, the ethereal giant's blade swinging downward in a strike that aimed to bisect the plane itself along with everything standing on it. The sword's edge burned blue-purple with combined Mangekyo and Rinnegan energy. Its descent made the air scream. The pressure wave preceding it flattened the remaining grass for 100 meters in every direction. Naruto activated the Nine Tails chakra enhancement. Kurama's energy erupted from behind the seal with a force that exceeded every previous summoning. The red chakra spiraled upward through Naruto's body in a column of vermilion fire, visible for miles, felt for further, the heat of it igniting the flattened grass around his feet in a ring of fire that spread outward. The red met the green at his core, and the double helix formed, red and green braiding together, with the familiar sound of two incompatible forces being made compatible by something stubborn enough to refuse their incompatibility. The gold-tinged third energy manifested. The fusion of Tailed Beast and Emperor reached its full expression. The power climbing past every previous ceiling, past the Shukaku fight, past the Itachi fight, past every use since the awakening. The ground beneath Naruto's feet did not crack. The ground beneath Naruto's feet liquefied. The stone below the grass melted to magma under the pressure output, red-orange glow mixing with the gold-green of the enhancement's visual signature. The Wrath Hammer formed at its absolute maximum. Every consumed soul in the reservoir fed it. Orochimaru's power, Itachi's power, Nagato's Rinnegan Echo, Kasame's legendary reserves, Obito's dimensional energy, Manda's ancient strength. Thousands of warriors, hundreds of shinobi, decades of accumulation, compressed into a single weapon that blazed with an intensity that made looking at it directly an act of self-harm. He leaped. The ground where he had been standing exploded downward, the magma splashing outward in a ring, the bedrock beneath it shattering in a crater that was 10 feet deep before his feet cleared the surface. His trajectory was a comet, green and red and gold, trailing power like a burning banner behind him, rising to meet the Susanu's descending blade in the space above the plane where sky met technique and legend met emperor. Taste the wrath of my hammer. The Wrath Hammer met the perfect Susanu's sword at the midpoint of both trajectories. What followed was beyond the vocabulary of combat, beyond the vocabulary of natural disaster, beyond any framework the elemental nations had developed for describing events that occurred within their borders. The collision produced a shockwave that traveled outward at the speed of sound in every direction, a sphere of force that erased the plane. The grass was gone, the topsoil was gone, the stone beneath was gone. Bedrock, exposed, ancient, the deep foundation of the earth itself, cracked in patterns that ran for kilometers. The mountain ranges on either side of the plain received the shockwave and shed their faces, avalanches triggering simultaneously on both ranges, millions of tons of rock cascading downward in synchronized destruction that buried the foothills in rubble. The sound reached 3 countries. Detection arrays in the hidden stone registered seismic activity. The hidden clouds observation posts reported a flash of light on their southern horizon. The hidden sand, hundreds of kilometers distant, noted a pressure wave that made their boundary sensors think an army was approaching. The perfect Susanu's sword shattered. The ethereal blade broke at the point of contact, the hammer's concentrated force exceeding the technique's material capacity in a single frame. The fracture traveled upward from the breakpoint to the hilt, the entire length of the blade separating into fragments of fading energy that dispersed into the sky like blue-purple sparks from a dying forge. The Susanu's hand, empty now, its weapon destroyed, recoiled from the impact. Naruto's momentum continued. The Wrath Hammer, unchecked by the blade that was supposed to have stopped it, continued its arc into the Susanu's chest. The impact hit the armored torso of the perfect manifestation, the strongest defensive technique the Mangekyo could produce at its maximum expression, and the armor cracked. The fracture line started at the impact point and propagated in every direction simultaneously. The Susanu's chest piece split. The ribs beneath it split. The internal structure of the ethereal giant failed in cascading sequence, each layer breaking an instant after the one above it, the destruction traveling inward toward the center where Madara floated within the construct's protected core. The perfect Susanu fell. It fell the way buildings fall. Not all at once, but in sections, each piece separating from the whole and descending independently. The arms went first, their connection to the torso severed by the fractures. Then the legs buckled. Then the torso itself split open, its chest cavity exposed, collapsed forward, and Madara fell from within it, dropping from the protected space at the giant's core down toward the ruined plain below. He landed on his feet, because Madara Uchiha did not land on his back. He hit the exposed bedrock in a crouch, one hand down, one knee bent, and rose immediately. His Rinnegan blazed. His eternal Mangekyo blazed. His body, restored, powerful, carrying the combined heritage of Uchiha and Senju blood, straightened to its full height and faced the descending emperor with the expression of a man who has taken the worst hit of his life and chosen anger over defeat. He reformed the Susanoo, a partial manifestation, ribcage only, the minimum viable defense, and launched forward. His physical speed was legendary. His taijutsu was the product of a lifetime spent at the pinnacle of combat. He struck with Rinnegan-enhanced blows that carried the force of gravitational manipulation behind each fist. He was fast. He was powerful. He was everything his legend said he was. Naruto met him in the center of the destroyed plain, and they fought. The exchange lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds of blows that produced shockwaves, of the Wrath Hammer meeting Madara's Susanoo armored fists, of the ground beneath them being destroyed by the incidental forces their combat produced. 11 seconds during which the plain, already devastated, lost another 10 feet of depth across an area the size of a stadium. 11 seconds during which Madara Uchiha, the god of shinobi's era, the man who had challenged the first Hokage and made it a fight worth recording in history, gave everything he had to offer. It was insufficient. The Wrath Hammer caught Madara's Susanoo armored left arm on the 7th second, and the arm broke. The ethereal ribcage shattered. The physical arm beneath snapped at the forearm, the bone giving way under forces that exceeded its structural tolerance, regardless of how many legendary bloodlines ran through the cells that composed it. The shadow charge followed on the 8th second. Naruto's entire body wrapping in the green force shell and ramming forward into Madara's center mass with the full momentum of the enhancement behind it. Madara's body left the ground. His trajectory carried him backward through the air, 100 feet, 200 feet, before the ground reasserted its claim, and his body hit the bedrock in a slide that carved a trench for 30 additional feet. He rose. One arm broken, Susanoo gone, truth-seeking balls expended, limbo destroyed. He rose because Madara Uchiha was the kind of man who rose until his body physically could not, and his body had not yet reached that point. He reformed the Susanoo around himself again, smaller this time, barely covering his body, the ethereal armor flickering with the instability of a technique being maintained past its chakra budget. He charged. Naruto hit him with the Wrath Hammer. Madara rose. Naruto hit him with the Shadow Charge. Madara rose, slower, one leg dragging, the Rinnegan flickering in his right eye as the chakra sustaining it strained against its limits. Blood at the corner of his mouth, blood from a cut above his left eye. The ancient armor cracked at the chest and the shoulder. Naruto hit him with the Wrath Hammer again. Madara rose. On his knees first, then one foot, then standing, swaying, broken, his Susanoo unable to form around him anymore, his body the only barrier remaining between himself and what was coming. His Rinnegan spun, his Mangekyo spun, his hands formed seals for a technique, any technique, whatever his legendary repertoire could produce with the reserves he had remaining. The technique never formed. Naruto stood before him, the skull mask, the burning green eyes, the Wrath Hammer on his shoulder, the combined glow of the Nine Tails enhancement and the consumed soul reservoir making his body a beacon of emerald and gold against the darkening sky. He looked at Madara Uchiha, broken, bleeding, standing through will alone, the greatest legend the elemental nations had ever produced, and the pause he gave was the same pause he had given Itachi, the dignity of comprehension, the grace period of understanding, the 3 seconds in which a legend was allowed to recognize what it was standing in front of before the end arrived. Madara met his eyes. The Rinnegan, divine, ancient, the eyes of the sage given to a mortal, looked into the green fire of the Emperor's gaze and found something there that exceeded everything the Rinnegan had ever been shown. Something from outside. Something older than the sage himself. Something that had been conquering worlds before this world's first civilization learned to write its own name. A silence settled over the destroyed plain. The wind was still. The avalanche debris on both mountain ranges had finished settling. The only sound was Madara's breathing. Ragged, wet, the breathing of a body that had been hit by a force its legendary durability could only partially mitigate. "You are nothing." The words fell into the silence, and the silence broke under their weight. The dual-layered voice carried the absolute conviction of an emperor who had measured the strongest warrior of an entire civilization and found the measurement complete and the result final. The soul rip began. Green energy peeled from Madara's chest. The extraction started slow. The soul of a legend resisting, the spiritual force of Madara Uchiha pushing back against the technique, with everything a lifetime of being the strongest had given it. The resistance lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which Madara's face contorted. Pain and fury, and the specific expression of a man who has never been overpowered in his life, experiencing the absolute novelty of being overpowered at the most fundamental level of his existence. Then the resistance broke. The soul came free. Madara screamed. The sound was enormous, the full lung capacity of a god-tier warrior, expressing the specific agony of a soul being separated from a body it believed it owned. The scream echoed off the exposed mountain faces on both sides of the destroyed plain and came back to the center where it originated and found its source already collapsing. "Your soul is mine." Madara Uchiha's skull rose from his crumbling body, and it was the largest single soul Naruto had ever extracted. The skull blazed with a light that exceeded every previous consumption, the combined legacy of the Sharingan, the Rinnegan, Hashirama's cells, a century of accumulated power, the will of the strongest warrior in recorded history, all of it contained in a green burning construct that illuminated the plain from horizon to horizon. It trailed energy like a comet. It burned like a star going nova. It carried within it the answer to a question the elemental nations had been asking since its formation. What happens when the strongest legend meets something stronger? This is what happens. The soul consumption activated, and the skull streamed into Naruto's chest. The absorption lasted longer than any previous consumption. 5 full seconds of energy pouring into the Emperor's reservoir. The green light climbing and climbing and climbing until it was visible from a distance that made the previous visibility benchmarks meaningless. The column of emerald that rose from Naruto's body punched through the cloud cover above the plain and continued upward, illuminating the sky for 100 miles in every direction. The clouds turned green. The horizon turned green. For 1 minute, 1 full minute of the consumption's peak, the world looked like it belonged to the Emperor and had always belonged to the Emperor, and the only thing that had changed was that everyone could finally see it. The light subsided. The clouds returned to their natural color. Naruto stood at the center of a plain that was no longer a plain. It was a crater, a depression in the Earth's surface that would fill with water in the coming months and become a lake that would appear on maps with names that nobody would be brave enough to make irreverent. His power had no ceiling anymore. The consumed soul of Madara Uchiha, the strongest warrior the elemental nations had ever produced, had pushed the Emperor's capability past the point where measurement was meaningful. He existed outside the scale. He existed outside the framework. He existed outside any context the 5 nations could produce a response to. The 5 Kage learned what happened on the plain within 6 hours. Intelligence networks carried the information with the speed of genuine emergency, the kind of speed that only manifests when the information being carried represents an existential threat to the system that carries it. Seismic data from every sensory village confirmed it. Visual reports from border patrols confirmed it. The absence of Madara's chakra signature, a signature that had appeared on their detection networks 3 days prior and caused continent-wide panic, confirmed it. Something had destroyed Madara Uchiha. The something was still alive. The something was coming. The 5 Kage assembled at a neutral location, a conference hall built between the borders of 2 nations, designed for exactly this kind of emergency summit. They came with their guards. They came with their advisors. They came with the full military intelligence of their respective villages and the combined analytical capability of the greatest strategic minds the shinobi system had produced. They came with a plan. The Raikage, the fourth lightning shadow, a man whose physical speed and strength made him a genuine threat to anything operating within the normal parameters of shinobi combat, sat at the head of the table and proposed the approach. Combined assault. 5 Kai simultaneously. Every technique, every combination, every synergy their respective abilities could produce. They would fight together. They would create openings for each other. They would layer their attacks in combinations the Emperor could not address simultaneously. The plan was intelligent. The plan was the best plan available to beings operating within the system they operated within. The plan was a sandcastle's best plan for dealing with a tsunami. Well constructed, logical, and built on a foundation that the incoming force was going to make irrelevant. They chose a location. They prepared. They waited. Naruto arrived at noon on a day without clouds. He walked toward the 5 Kage's chosen battleground with the same unhurried pace he had used to walk toward every opponent since the age of 12. The pace that said arrival was inevitable, and hurrying was beneath him. His armor gleamed in the direct sunlight. The skull mask caught the noon light and threw it back. The wrath hammer rested on his shoulder. The green glow of his body, saturated with consumed souls fed by the strongest warriors the continent had produced, was visible at a distance that made the Kage's forward observers report his approach from a full mile away. They met him in formation. All 5 together, spread across the field in positions designed for combined assault. Each Kage placed where their abilities complemented the others, where their techniques could overlap and layer and compound. The Raikage struck first. Lightning released chakra mode at maximum output, his body wrapped in blue-white electricity, his speed climbing past the visible spectrum into the territory where movement becomes teleportation for anyone with insufficient reflexes. He crossed the distance between his starting position and Naruto's location in a time measurement that most instruments would round down to 0. His fist, empowered by the full force of his lightning armor, aimed at the skull mask with everything a Kage-level physical specialist could produce. Naruto activated the shadow charge. The green force shell erupted outward and met the Raikage's approach at the contact point. The collision was spectacular. Blue-white lightning meeting emerald soul energy in a detonation of competing colors that illuminated the field from every angle. The Raikage's fist connected with the shadow charge's surface, and his momentum stopped. Dead. Instantaneously. 300 kilometers per hour to 0 in a distance of inches, and the force of that deceleration traveled backward through the Raikage's arm and into his body and through him. The lightning shadow's body went backward at a speed that matched his approach. Launched by the shadow charge's impact force, his lightning armor flickering from the disruption, his trajectory carrying him across the field and into the ground in a trench that extended 60 feet from the point of impact. The Tsuchikage attacked during the Raikage's flight. Onoki, the old man, the fence-sitter, the Kage who had survived by outliving everything that tried to kill him, raised his hands and formed the technique that defined his legend. Dust release, detachment of the primitive world. A cube of energy manifested between his palms, 3-dimensional, geometric, the jutsu that erased matter at the molecular level by deconstructing it into component dust. He launched it at Naruto's position. The cube expanded as it traveled, growing from the size of a fist to the size of a house in the space between his palms and its target. The Emperor's shield materialized. The green wall caught the dust release technique at the midpoint of its trajectory. The cube of molecular deconstruction, a technique that had never failed to erase anything it contacted in the entire history of the Tsuchikage's use of it, hit the soul energy barrier and stopped. The technique pressed against the shield. The shield pressed back. For 2 seconds, the dust release cube attempted to deconstruct the soul energy the way it deconstructed everything else it touched. The soul energy was not matter. The soul energy was not chakra in the traditional sense. The soul energy existed outside the molecular framework the dust release operated within. The technique found nothing to deconstruct. The shield absorbed it, the geometric cube shrinking as its energy was consumed by the barrier, growing smaller at the contact point, diminishing, vanishing. Gone, Onoki's hands dropped. His mouth hung open. A technique he had used for 50 years, a technique that had ended wars, that had been classified as the ultimate offense because nothing had ever survived it, had been eaten alive by a green wall. The Mizukage attacked from the flank. Mei Terumi, the fifth water shadow, whose boil release produced an acidic mist that dissolved everything from stone to steel to chakra constructs, released her technique at full output. The cloud of corrosive vapor spread toward Naruto from the right, a wall of white mist that reduced visibility to zero and reduced anything caught within it to base chemicals. Naruto swung the wrath hammer at the ground. The impact with the earth produced a shock wave that traveled outward in a hemisphere, a pressure wave of displaced air that hit the boil release cloud and dispersed it. The mist broke apart. The corrosive vapor scattered in every direction away from the impact point, the atmospheric displacement of the hammer's ground strike reforming the geography of the air itself. The cloud that was supposed to dissolve the emperor dissolved into the atmosphere instead, too diffuse to corrode, too scattered to function. The Kazekage, Gaara's successor, a man who had inherited the position after Gaara's submission, launched a wave of iron sand. The magnetic technique, the third Kazekage's legendary ability, passed down through the generations, sent a tsunami of metallic particles toward Naruto from behind. The iron sand shaped itself into weapons mid-flight. Spears, blades, needles, thousands of them, a rain of sharp metal aimed at every angle. Naruto turned. The iron sand hit the Emperor's shield and converted to energy scatter on contact, each particle touching the green barrier and ceasing to be metal, ceasing to be anything. The molecular structure of the iron failing against the soul energy, the way everything failed against the soul energy. The tsunami of weapons became a cascade of green sparks, dissolving on the shield's surface in a waterfall of converted matter. Tsunade was last, the slug princess. Senju Tsunade, granddaughter of the first Hokage, the strongest medical ninja in history, the woman whose fists cracked the earth and whose strength of 100 seal made her functionally immortal for the duration of a fight, charged from the front. The yin seal on her forehead released. The purple diamond pattern spread across her skin. The full deployment of 5 years saved chakra, the regeneration technique that had allowed her to survive injuries that would kill any other human multiple times over. Her fist drew back. Chakra concentrated in her knuckles to a density that made the air around her hand shimmer. She was fast. She was strong. She hit Naruto in the chest with every ounce of Kaji-level enhanced strength her legendary bloodline and her legendary technique could produce. The punch connected. The armor took it. The impact sound was a clean, sharp crack that echoed across the field. The sound of Tsunade's full power meeting the Emperor's chest plate. Naruto rocked backward 1 step. His boots left 2 grooves in the earth, 2 parallel lines, each 6 inches long, carved into the ground by the force of a Kage's strongest punch. The armor held. The chest plate showed a mark, a depression in the soul energy material the size and shape of Tsunade's fist, a dent that proved the punch had been real, had been powerful, had been everything a legend could deliver. Then the mark repaired itself. The soul energy flowed into the depression and filled it, the dent vanishing in a second, the armor returning to its unblemished state, while Tsunade watched from 3 feet away with her fist still extended and her expression changing from determination to something else. Naruto looked at the impact site on his chest where the punch had landed. The armor was smooth. He looked back at Tsunade, the last Sannin, the Hokage, the woman who had buried her fear behind a gambling addiction and a sake habit, and come out the other side still standing. It's official. You suck. The words hit Tsunade's face at point-blank range, and the weight behind them, the familiar final, absolute weight of the Emperor's contempt, distilled into 4 words, made her step backward. The strength of 100 seal was still active. Her chakra was still flowing. Her body was still ready to fight. Her mind, the brilliant, experienced, legendary mind of a woman who had survived everything, was telling her something her pride did not want to hear. The field was silent. The Raikage was climbing from his trench. The Tsuchikage was hovering with empty hands and an empty expression. The Mizukage's mist was gone. The Kazekage's iron sand was gone. Every technique, every combination, every ounce of Kaji-level power the 5 villages could produce had been deployed, and the Emperor was standing with 1 step's worth of retreat to show for it. 1 step, against the combined output of the 5 Kage. 1 step that had already been erased by the armor's self-repair. The Raikage looked at the other Kage. The Tsuchikage looked at the ground. The Mizukage let her hands fall to her sides. The Kazekage, who had inherited his position from a man who had already submitted, stood very still and said nothing, and waited for whatever came next. Naruto raised the wrath hammer above his head. The Emperor's proclamation activated. The full power voice, the dual-layered resonance at maximum output, the technique that was itself a weapon of psychological demolition. When he spoke, the ground vibrated. When he spoke, the air compressed. When he spoke, the 5 Kaji, legends all, warriors all, the strongest people their nations had produced, felt the words in their marrow. Your resistance means nothing. The words landed on the field and the fight ended. It ended the way all the Emperor's fights ended. With a verdict, with a pronouncement, with the absolute certainty of someone who could destroy everything present and was choosing instead to leave it standing because standing witnesses served purposes that corpses could not serve. The Kaj remained alive. They remained present. They remained the holders of titles that could authorize the formal surrender of their nations. The fight had been the education. The surrender would follow as the final exam. It followed within the week. The Valley of the End hosted the gathering because the Valley of the End was where this story had begun its 2nd chapter and where it would reach its conclusion. The cracked statues of Hashirama and Madara still stood, split down their midlines, their broken faces staring at each other across a space where a waterfall had once fallen and now stood dry because the geography of the valley had been rewritten by the shockwave of a battle 2 years prior. The river had found a different path. The valley had found a different purpose. Naruto built his throne between the statues. The construction was an act of will rather than labor. Soul energy compressing into stone and iron, and something harder than both. The seat rising from the valley floor in segments that locked together with the precision of a thing being manifested by a consciousness that had built thrones in 100 realms and remembered the design of every one. The final product was massive, raised 15 feet above the valley floor on a platform of green-veined stone, backed by twin pillars of compressed soul energy that burned with permanent emerald light. The seat itself was iron, and the iron was warm with the contained power of thousands of consumed souls, and the warmth radiated outward in waves that turned the immediate air around the throne into a space that felt alive. He sat. The assembled nation stood before him. They filled the valley floor from the base of the throne's platform to the curves of the valley walls. Hundreds of people, thousands, if you counted the delegations from every territory that had submitted over the 2-year campaign. Zabuza stood at the throne's right, the demon of the mist in formal attire, the executioner's blade on his back, his position beside the emperor, a statement of seniority within the new order. Haku stood at Zabuza's side with her hands folded and her face carrying the expression of someone who had chosen correctly and been rewarded with a place in history. The 5 Kage occupied the front row of the assembly. Their faces carried the specific expression of leaders who had been defeated and survived and understood that the survival was itself a message about their future role. Tsunade, A, Onoki, Mei, the Kazekage, each of them wearing their village's symbols for the last time. Behind them, the Jonin commanders of each village. Behind them, the clan heads and the council members and the daimyo of each nation. The civilian leaders who held the economic and territorial authority that the Kage supplemented with military force. Gaara stood among them. The former Jinchuriki, the boy who had been beaten on an arena floor years ago, who had felt fear for the first time looking up at a skull mask, who had spent the years since doing the mathematics of survival, and reaching the same conclusion every intelligent being reached when facing this particular equation, bowed first. His knee hit the valley floor before anyone else's. his head lowered. The acknowledgement was clean and simple, and carried the weight of someone who understood what he was kneeling before because he had felt it firsthand. The valley was full, and the valley was silent, and the sky above was clear, and the broken statues of the old legends looked down on the new reality with stone eyes that would never see clearly again. Naruto stood from the throne. The green light expanded from his body as he rose. A pulse of soul energy that rolled outward across the assembly, like a wave across a still lake, touching every person present, pressing against every chest, filling every pair of lungs with the awareness of proximity to something absolute. The pulse carried intent. The pulse carried authority. The pulse was itself the opening statement of what came next. Hear me. The dual-layered voice erupted from his body with a force that made the valley walls vibrate. It traveled outward, past the assembly, past the valley's rim, past the forest beyond, carried on soul energy that amplified and extended it until the sound reached further than any voice had ever reached in the history of the elemental nations. People in villages 50 miles away heard it. The words arrived as a pressure in the chest, as a vibration in the bones, as the specific awareness that something had just spoken, and the something was speaking to everyone within the range of its authority. And the range of its authority was everything. The terms of the new Outworld fell from the throne's height like stones dropped from a great elevation, arriving at the crowd below with the force of gravity and finality and the absolute certainty of something that was being pronounced rather than proposed. The 5 villages were districts of a single empire. The borders dissolved, the lines on maps that had divided nations for generations ceasing to carry meaning, becoming historical curiosities rather than political realities. The Kage titles were retired. The word Hokage and Kazekage and Raikage and Mizukage and Tsuchikage joined the vocabulary of the past, terminology that described a system that had existed and no longer existed and would exist again only in the memories of people who had lived through its ending. The shinobi system remained. The villages remained. The infrastructure remained. Everything that functioned continued to function. Everything that served continued to serve. The only thing that changed was the question of who sat at the top of the hierarchy, and the answer to that question changed from 5 competing authorities to 1, and the 1 was on the throne, and the throne was here, and the matter was closed. All realms bow before Shao Kahn. The final proclamation rolled across the Valley of the End with a resonance that made the broken statues behind the throne vibrate in their foundations. The words carried 10,000 years of conquest behind them. Every realm Shao Kahn had ever claimed, every civilization he had ever consumed, every throne he had ever built from the wreckage of what stood before it, all of it compressed into 6 words that announced the end of one era and the beginning of the next. The assembly bowed. Gaara was first. The Kage followed. One by one, their knees hitting the valley floor in a sequence that sounded like a drum roll building to its conclusion. Then the Jonin behind them. Then the clan heads. Then the daimyo. Then the civilians. Then everyone, every living person in the Valley of the End, going down in a wave that traveled from front to back like a stadium wave made of submission. Heads lowered, knees bent. The sound of hundreds of bodies assuming the posture of acknowledgement filled the valley in a rustle of cloth and the soft impacts of knees on stone. The green light from Naruto's body expanded as the bowing began. It rose from his armor, climbing, building, reaching upward in a column of emerald that punched through the clear sky above the valley and continued skyward until it touched the clouds at their altitude and illuminated them from below. The valley turned green. The assembly turned green. Every face, every bowed head, every folded knee, all of it bathed in emerald light that came from the throne and everything that sat upon it. The light was visible from 100 miles. It was visible from the borders of every former nation. It was a beacon, a marker, a landmark, a permanent alteration of the visual landscape that announced to anyone looking at the horizon from any direction that something had changed at the center of the world, and the change was final. The broken statues of Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha loomed behind the throne, split in 2, their faces divided, their legacy superseded. They had fought each other at this valley a century ago, and their battle had been considered the pinnacle of what power could achieve in this world. Their cracked stone faces watched the assembly bow before something that had exceeded them so thoroughly that their monument had become decoration for its throne room. Rain began to fall. It came from the illuminated clouds above, green tinged at first, catching the light of the column that had risen through them, each drop carrying a hint of emerald as it descended through the luminous air. It fell on the assembly. It fell on the bowed heads and the bent knees and the surrendered nations below. It fell on the throne and the emperor who sat upon it and the armor that radiated the energy that colored the sky. It fell on the valley walls and the broken statues and the dry riverbed where a waterfall used to be. Naruto sat on his throne and watched the rain fall on his empire. The Valley of the End had earned its name for the third and final time. The first had been Hashirama and Madara, the founding battle, the original conflict between the strongest of their era. The second had been Naruto and Sasuke, the moment the emperor left behind the village that had tried to contain him. The third was this, the moment the world stopped being a collection of fragments and became a single thing under a single will. The moment the map stopped mattering because the person reading it owned everything on it. The rain fell, the assembly remained bowed, the green light held the sky, and the emperor sat on his throne in the ruins of the world's greatest monument to conflict, and the statues of legends stared blind behind him, and the new Outworld began in silence and emerald light, and the story of the elemental nations ended the way all stories end when they meet something bigger than their pages can hold. Completely, irrevocably, with the sound of rain on stone and the glow of a conqueror's light touching everything it can see, which is everything, which is the whole world, which is enough.
God damn, what a ride! If you felt that power, smash like, subscribe for more insane what-if crossovers, and drop a comment on who gets wrecked next. Thanks for watching. Stay savage, legends.